The door locked behind her with a sound like a death sentence. Liora's heart slammed against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack bone. She stood frozen in the center of the Alpha King's private chamber, her fingers still trembling from where they'd brushed his arm. An accident, a stupid, careless accident, and now the air itself felt different. Heavier. Charged with something that made her skin prickle and her wolfless instincts scream at her to run. But there was nowhere to run. Not anymore. The celebration outside continued, music and laughter filtering through the stone walls like echoes from another world. The lunar convergence had the entire fortress drunk on moonlight and wine, bodies pressed together in the great hall, voices raised in toasts to power and conquest and the Alpha King who ruled them all with blood and iron. She should still be there, invisible in the corner, refilling goblets, keeping her head down and her mouth shut like she'd done every single day for the past 3 years. Instead, she'd spoken. One word. One reckless, honest, idiotic word that had slipped past her defenses when Fenric Blackthorn, conqueror of 7 territories, destroyer of rebellions, the most feared alpha in living memory, had looked directly at her and asked what she thought of the tapestry hanging above his throne. Handsome. She'd said handsome. Not beautiful. Not impressive. Not magnificent or awe-inspiring or any of the flowery words the courtiers used when they wanted to stay breathing. Just handsome. Like he was a man and not a legend. Like she'd forgotten for one catastrophic second that girls like her, wolfless, powerless, born to serve and die in shadows, didn't look at kings. Didn't speak to them. Didn't exist in their world except as background noise. The silence that followed had been absolute. 300 shifters, all frozen mid-celebration. Goblets suspended halfway to lips. Conversations dying on tongues. Eyes turning toward her like wolves scenting wounded prey. And Fenric, gods, Fenric had gone completely still, his massive frame radiating something that felt like barely leashed violence. Or hunger. Or both. Then he'd smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Come with me, he'd said, his voice carrying across the hall with the weight of command that had bent entire packs to his will. Not a request. Not an invitation. An order that she couldn't refuse even if her survival instincts hadn't already been screaming at her to obey. So she'd followed him. Through corridors lined with guards who watched her pass with expressions ranging from pity to contempt. Up the spiral staircase reserved for the Alpha bloodline. Past tapestries depicting battles won and enemies crushed. To this room, his private chamber, where the door had shut behind them with the finality of a coffin lid closing. Now she stood there, her servant's dress still stained from the day's work, her dark hair falling loose from its braid, and tried very hard not to shake visibly while Fenric Blackthorn circled her like a predator deciding where to sink his teeth first. He was massive even by shifter standards. 6.5 feet of pure muscle wrapped in formal black that did nothing to disguise the violence built into every line of his body. Dark hair pulled back from a face that looked carved from granite and cruelty, all sharp angles and harder edges except for his mouth, which was almost obscenely sensual for a man rumored to have ripped out his own cousin's throat with his bare hands. But it was his eyes that truly terrified her. Amber gold and burning with an intensity that made her feel stripped naked and examined down to her worthless, wolfless bones. Those eyes were fixed on her now with an expression she couldn't name but felt in her marrow. Do you know what you've done? His voice was low. Controlled. The kind of quiet that came before explosions. Liora's throat closed around words that wouldn't come anyway. She managed a jerky shake of her head, not trusting herself to speak again. Speaking had gotten her into this mess. Speaking would probably get her killed. Fenric stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his skin, smell the scent of him, pine and smoke, and something wild that made her hindbrain want to either flee or press closer. She fought both impulses and stood her ground through sheer stubborn terror. Look at me. She didn't want to. Every instinct she'd honed over years of survival screamed at her to keep her eyes down, to make herself small, to disappear into the background where she belonged. But his power wrapped around the command like invisible chains, and her gaze lifted against her will until she was staring directly into those burning gold eyes. The world tilted. Something snapped into place inside her chest, a feeling like recognition, like coming home, like finding something she hadn't known she'd lost. It was warmth and terror and want all tangled together until she couldn't tell where one ended and another began. Her breath caught. Her skin flushed hot, then cold, then hot again. And beneath her breastbone, in the place where her wolf should have lived if she'd been born right, something stirred. Something that had been sleeping her entire life suddenly opened one eye. Fenric's pupils dilated, swallowing the gold until his eyes were almost black. A low sound rumbled from his chest, not quite a growl, not quite a groan. His hand came up and she flinched, expecting violence, but his fingers only brushed her cheek with a gentleness that somehow frightened her more than brutality would have. "No," he whispered, and the words sounded like anguish. Like fury. Like prayers to gods who'd stopped listening. "No, this can't be." The bond hit her like lightning. Every nerve in her body ignited at once. She gasped, stumbling backward, but Fenric's arm was already around her waist, hauling her against his chest while that impossible feeling intensified until she thought she might burn alive from the inside out. "Mine," something in her head whispered with a voice that wasn't hers. "Mine, mine, mine." An instinct older than language, deeper than thought, absolute as gravity. "No," Fenric's voice cracked on the word. His grip on her tightened until it bordered on painful. "You can't be her. You don't have a wolf. You're nothing, you're." The cruelty of the words should have hurt. Should have cut deep into all her old wounds and made them bleed fresh. But they couldn't touch her through the golden thread now connecting her consciousness to his, letting her feel the chaos of his emotions, shock and denial and rage, and beneath it all, a wanting so fierce it made her previous loneliness feel like a mercy. He wanted her. Had wanted her. The recognition in his eyes wasn't new, it was old. Buried. Deliberately ignored. "You knew." Her voice came out hoarse but steady. Accusing. "You've known." Fenric's jaw clenched hard enough she heard teeth grind. For a moment she thought he might deny it, might throw her aside, might call guards to drag her to the dungeons or worse. But then his forehead dropped to rest against hers, and the surrender in the gesture was more terrifying than any violence could have been. 3 years, he breathed against her skin. 3 years you've been here, and I've known every single day. Your scent. Your heartbeat. The way you move through rooms like you're apologizing for existing. I've known and I've fought it, and his hand slid up to cup the back of her neck, fingers tangling in her hair. "The council said you'd be my destruction. The prophecy said your blood would end my line. So I kept you close and wolfless and powerless, thinking I could control it. Thinking if I never acknowledged the bond, it would wither and die, and I could find another mate. A proper one. One who wouldn't." He cut himself off, but she heard the rest in the thundering of his pulse against hers. One who wouldn't destroy everything he'd built. "I'm not your destruction," Liora whispered, but even as she said it, she felt the lie. Felt the truth coiled in her blood like a serpent waiting to strike. Something was waking up inside her. Something that had nothing to do with wolves or packs or any of the power structures she'd lived beneath her entire life. Something older. Wilder. Wrong. Fenric pulled back enough to look at her, and the expression on his face was caught between reverence and horror. "You don't understand what you are," he said softly. "What your mother was. What they had to do to keep you dormant." Cold dread crystallized in her stomach. "My mother, she died when I was born. The fever took her. Your mother was executed." The words fell like stones into deep water. "For refusing to let the High Council bind your power. For trying to run with you before the ritual could be completed. She fought 6 alphas before they brought her down, and even then it took 3 days for her to die because her blood wouldn't let go." The room spun. Leora's knees buckled, but Fenric held her upright, held her against him while her entire understanding of her life cracked open and bled truth. The fever was a lie, he continued, relentless now. The binding was real. They wrapped your power so tight you couldn't even manifest a wolf. Made you weak. Made you safe. And then they placed you here, in my fortress, so I could watch you. So I could kill you if the bond ever surfaced. Kill me, she repeated numbly. His hand tightened in her hair. Kill you, he confirmed. Before you could claim what's yours. I don't want anything. You want everything. His eyes burned into hers. You just don't remember yet. But the bond is breaking the binding. I can smell it on you underneath the fear and confusion. Something ancient waking up. Something that doesn't bow to kings. The howl that erupted outside wasn't natural. It carried harmonics that made the stone walls vibrate and the candles flicker. Fenric's head snapped toward the window, his entire body going rigid with predatory awareness. Then came the screaming. They know, he said flatly. The packs can feel the bond forming. They'll think I've claimed you. He looked at her, and something like regret flickered across his brutal features. And claiming you is an act of treason against every law we have. Then reject it. The words tore out of her. Reject the bond. Send me away. I'll disappear, I'll go so far. I can't. The admission sounded like it was killing him. 3 years I've tried and I can't. And now that it's active, his thumb traced the line of her jaw with devastating gentleness. Now that I've touched you, now that I know what you taste like in my senses, I'd burn the world down before I let you go. Another howl rose closer. Then another. The celebration had turned into chaos. She could hear doors slamming, orders being shouted, the distinctive sound of warriors arming themselves for battle. What do we do? She breathed. Fenric's smile was sharp and terrible and promised violence to anyone who tried to come between them. He pulled her impossibly closer, his mouth brushing her ear as he spoke. We survive, little mate. And then, his teeth grazed her earlobe, sending lightning down her spine. Then you're going to remember what you really are. And everyone who tried to make you small is going to learn what happens when you cage something that was meant to burn kingdoms. The door exploded inward. 5 wolves poured through the shattered doorway in a cascade of fur and fangs and barely controlled rage. Leora's scream died in her throat as Fenric moved. One moment he was holding her, the next he was a blur of lethal precision, his body positioning itself between her and the intruders with an instinct that bypassed thought entirely. His hand shot out behind him, fingers wrapping around her wrist in a grip that was both anchor and chain. Stay behind me, he commanded, and the alpha dominance in his voice made her knees want to buckle even as every cell in her body rushed to obey. The wolves circled them, their growls a symphony of threat that raised every hair on her body. They were massive, all of them warriors from the elite guard, muscles rippling beneath fur that ranged from silver to midnight black. Their eyes glowed with that preternatural awareness that came with the shift, intelligence, and predatory hunger mixing into something that made her bladder want to release. But it was the 6th figure that made Fenric's grip on her wrist tighten until bones ground together. He walked through the doorway in human form, tall and lean and wrapped in the formal robes of the High Council. Silver threaded through his black hair despite him being nowhere near old, and his eyes, pale blue and cold as winter ice, fixed on Liora with an expression that made her understand what prey felt like in the moment before death. Councilman Valen, Fenric said, his voice dropping into registers that vibrated through the floorboards. You break into my private chambers. You bring warriors into my personal sanctuary. You interrupt. We interrupt nothing, Alpha King. Valen's voice was smooth, cultured, the kind of reasonable tone that made atrocities sound like policy decisions. We simply respond to a disturbance that has alarmed the entire fortress. The bond. His gaze slid from Fenric to Liora, and she felt it like ice water in her veins. It has activated. My bonds are my own business. Not when they violate every treaty signed in your grandfather's blood. Valen took a step forward and the wolves moved with him, tightening their circle. Not when they threaten the stability of 7 territories. Not when the female in question is the daughter of. Careful. The word came out barely above a whisper, but every wolf in the room flattened their ears. Fenric's power rolled off him in waves that made the air itself feel heavy. Very careful how you finish that sentence. Valen's smile never reached his eyes. The daughter of Alara Whisper. The Flamekeeper. The last of the firstborn. He tilted his head, studying Liora like she was an interesting specimen pinned to a board. Did he tell you what your mother was, child? Did he explain why she had to die? Liora's mouth had gone completely dry. She tried to speak, but Fenric's grip tightened in warning and she swallowed the words. He told you some of it, I see. Valen's smile widened. But not all. Not the part about how your mother could shift into forms we haven't seen since the Age of Legends. Not the part about how her blood could command any wolf, regardless of their alpha's will. And certainly not the part about the prophecy that says her daughter, you, little nothing, would rise on the night the moon converges and unmake everything we've built. The prophecy is children's tales, Fenric growled. Fear-mongering from superstitious. The prophecy, Valen interrupted, has been unfolding for 23 years. Every sign, every portent. We bound her power at birth, placed her in your fortress, kept her dormant and docile and utterly ignorant of what sleeps in her veins. And still, his voice hardened. Still, you couldn't resist, could you? Still, the great Alpha King, conqueror of territories and breaker of rebellions, fell prey to a bond that should never have been acknowledged. The wolves snarled in agreement, their bodies tensing for an attack that Liora could feel building in the air like an approaching storm. You were given one task. Valen's eyes locked on Fenric with something that might have been disappointment or might have been satisfaction. Liora couldn't tell. Watch her. Keep her contained. And if the bond ever activated, end her before she could claim her birthright. It was the price of your crown. The condition of your rule. The only thing standing between this kingdom and civil war. Civil war, Fenric repeated, his voice dangerously soft. Is that what you're threatening, councilman? I'm threatening nothing. I'm stating facts. Valen spread his hands in a gesture of reasonableness that made Liora's skin crawl. 7 territories bow to you because you're the strongest. The most ruthless. The Alpha who put down the rebellions and united the packs through sheer dominance. But if you choose her, he pointed at Liora like she was a thing and not a person. If you claim a bond that makes you vulnerable, that ties your power to someone who could theoretically command it away from you, the other alphas won't stand for it. They'll see weakness. They'll move against you. And this kingdom will tear itself apart. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the wolves' panting breaths and the distant sounds of chaos from the fortress below. You're asking me to kill my mate, Fenric said finally, and Liora felt the words reverberate through the bond between them, felt his rage and his anguish, and beneath it all, a desperate possessiveness that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. I'm asking you to be the king you claimed you'd be. Valen's expression hardened. To put the kingdom before personal desire. Your grandfather understood this. Your father understood this. They both rejected their true mates when those bonds threatened the realm. It's what separates kings from common wolves. Fenric was silent for a long moment. Liora could feel his heart thundering through the connection between them, could feel the war raging in his chest as duty and instinct tore at each other like rabid dogs. His hand in hers was the only warm thing in a room that had gone cold as a tomb. No, he said quietly. Valen blinked. No, Fenric's voice grew stronger, filling the space with absolute conviction. I won't kill her. I won't reject the bond. And if the other alphas want to challenge me for that choice, his smile was all teeth and no humor. Let them come. I've beaten every challenger who's ever stood against me. A few more corpses won't make a difference. The wolves erupted into snarls, but Valen held up a hand, silencing them with a gesture that spoke of authority Liora didn't understand. He studied Fenric for a long moment, something calculating moving behind his cold eyes. "Very well," he said softly. "Then the girl must be tested." "Tested?" Liora's voice came out as barely a whisper, but every eye in the room turned to her. She immediately regretted speaking. Valen's attention on her felt like being flayed. The prophecy speaks of the Flamekeeper's daughter awakening her power and choosing whether to rule or ruin. If you truly are what the legends claim, you'll be able to pass through the trials of the firstborn, 3 tests that will either unlock your birthright or kill you in the attempt. His smile was knife-thin. If you survive and prove yourself worthy, the council will accept your bond with the Alpha King. If you fail, well, problem solved either way. That's insane, Fenric snarled. The trials haven't been performed in 300 years. No one even knows if the ritual sites still stand. And even if they do, sending her in blind, with no training, no preparation, is exactly what the prophecy requires. Valen cut him off smoothly. True power doesn't need training. It simply is. If she's meant to survive, she will. If not, he shrugged. Then perhaps the bond was a mistake after all. Liora felt Fenric's fury through their connection, felt him preparing to refuse, to fight, to tear Valen apart with his bare hands if necessary. But she also felt something else rising in her chest. Something that had been sleeping her whole life and was now stretching awake with a hunger that made her breathless. She didn't want to be tested. Didn't want to face trials designed to kill her. But she also didn't want to be the reason Fenric lost everything. Didn't want to be the weakness that destroyed a kingdom. And more than that, underneath the fear and the confusion, she wanted to know. Wanted to know what her mother had died protecting. Wanted to know what power could possibly scare men like Valen so badly they'd spend 23 years keeping it bound. Wanted to know if the voice whispering mine in the back of her head was madness or destiny. "I'll do it," she heard herself say. Fenric spun to face her, his expression caught between shock and rage. "Liora, I'll do the trials." She met his burning eyes and refused to look away even though every instinct screamed at her to submit. "If it's the only way to make this right. If it's the only way to prove I'm not," she swallowed hard. "Not whatever they think I am. Then I'll do it." "You don't understand what you're agreeing to," Fenric said urgently, his hands coming up to frame her face. The trials were designed for fully trained shifters with years of combat experience. "You don't even have a wolf. You'll die." She smiled, and it felt strange on her face. Like trying on an expression that belonged to someone braver. "Maybe. But I've been dying slowly my whole life anyway. At least this way it'll be quick." Something flickered in his eyes, pride maybe, or horror, or both tangled together until they were inseparable. His thumb traced her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "If you do this," he said softly, "I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not." Valen's voice cracked like a whip. "The trials must be faced alone. That's the entire point. She proves herself or she doesn't. Your presence would invalidate." "I don't care." Fenric didn't look away from Liora. "I won't send her to die alone. The prophecy says nothing about her needing to face the trials without support. Only that she must be the one to complete them." Valen's jaw tightened, but after a moment he inclined his head. "Fine. You may accompany her to the sites. But you cannot interfere with the trials themselves. Not physically. Not through the bond. If you try to help her in any way, she fails automatically and the sentence will be carried out immediately." "Sentence," Liora repeated, her stomach dropping. "Death, child." Valen's smile was cold as ice. "Did you think there would be another option? You're either the prophesied savior who can unite the packs, or you're the dangerous abomination who needs to be put down before you destroy us all. The trials will determine which." The wolves growled their agreement, their eyes fixed on Liora with an intensity that made her feel like prey again. But Fenric's hands on her face kept her grounded, kept her from spiraling into the panic clawing at her throat. "When?" Fenric demanded. "Tomorrow night. The convergence lasts 3 days. She must complete all 3 trials before the moon wanes, or the power will never fully wake. Valen turned toward the door, his robes sweeping behind him. Use tonight to prepare her, Alpha King. Tell her what she needs to know. Say whatever goodbyes you think appropriate. He paused in the doorway, looking back over his shoulder. Though I'd advise against getting too attached. The first trial alone has a 90% fatality rate. Then he was gone, the wolves flowing after him like shadows, leaving Liora and Fenric alone in the wreckage of the room. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The bond between them pulsed with emotions too tangled to name: fear and fury and determination, and beneath it all, that constant, insistent pull. Mine. Ours. Together. I'm sorry, Liora whispered. I'm so sorry, I should never have spoken, I should have just. Fenric kissed her. It wasn't gentle. Wasn't sweet or tentative or any of the things a first kiss was supposed to be. It was desperation and possession and a promise all tangled together, his mouth claiming hers with an intensity that made her knees buckle. She gasped against his lips and he swallowed the sound, one hand fisting in her hair while the other wrapped around her waist and hauled her against him until there was no space between their bodies. The bond sang. Every nerve ending lit up at once, pleasure and recognition and rightness flooding through her system until she thought she might drown in it. She could feel his heart beating in time with hers, could feel his emotions bleeding into her own until she didn't know where she ended and he began. Want. Need. Mine. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard, foreheads pressed together, sharing air. Don't apologize, he said roughly. Don't you ever apologize for being what you are. For existing. For speaking one honest word in a court full of liars. His hand slid up to cup the back of her neck. Whatever happens in these trials, whatever you find out about yourself, I need you to remember something. What? His eyes burned into hers, gold and fierce and absolutely certain. You're mine. My mate. My equal. And I will burn this kingdom to ash before I let them take you from me. The conviction in his voice should have frightened her. Should have made her pull away from the possessiveness that bordered on madness. But instead, she felt something in her chest respond. Something that had been caged her entire life, suddenly testing the bars and finding them weaker than she'd thought. What if they're right, she whispered. What if I am dangerous? What if my power really would destroy? Then we'll destroy together. His smile was sharp and wild. And build something better from the ashes. Outside, the moon reached its zenith. The convergence began in earnest, power flooding the world with a light that turned everything silver. And in Liora's chest, where her wolf should have been, something else stirred. Something that had been waiting 23 years to wake up. Something that had nothing to do with wolves or packs or any power structure they could understand. Something that whispered in her mother's voice, remember. They didn't sleep. How could they? Tomorrow night she would face trials designed to kill her, and tonight was all they had to prepare for something neither of them fully understood. Fenric had dismissed the guards, sealed the doors with his own authority, and now they sat across from each other on the floor of his chamber while candles burned low and the moon climbed higher. Liora watched him pace. Back and forth across the stone floor, his movements restless with an energy that had nowhere to go. Every few minutes he'd pause, open his mouth like he was going to say something, then shake his head and resume pacing. The bond between them hummed with his agitation, making her own anxiety spike higher with each passing moment. Tell me, she said finally, unable to bear the silence anymore. Tell me what my mother was. What I'm supposed to be. Fenric stopped, turned to face her. For a long moment he just stared, his eyes tracing her features like he was memorizing them. Like he thought he might never get another chance. Your mother was a myth made flesh, he said quietly. The last descendant of the firstborn, the original shifters who walked the earth before packs, before territories, before any of the structures we have now. They weren't just wolves, Liora. They were everything. Every predator. Every form. They could shift into creatures we don't even have names for anymore. He moved to sit across from her again, close enough that their knees almost touched. Close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his skin and smell that pine and smoke scent that made her head spin. The firstborn ruled for thousands of years, he continued. But they were too powerful, too unpredictable. They followed no laws, but their own desires, acknowledged no authority, but their own strength. So the lesser shifters, our ancestors, rose up against them. It took centuries of warfare, but eventually the firstborn were hunted to extinction. Or so everyone thought. But my mother survived, Liora breathed. Your mother hid. For generations, her bloodline hid among normal wolves, only shifting into their true forms in secret, only using their power when absolutely necessary. They learned to be small, to be invisible, to pretend they were nothing special. His jaw clenched. Until your mother refused to hide anymore. The way he said it, with equal parts admiration and resentment, made Liora's chest ache. What did she do? She fell in love. Fenric's smile was bitter. With a common wolf. Your father. He was nobody, a tracker from a minor pack with no status and no prospects. But he saw her. Really saw her. And when her true form manifested during a territory dispute, when she shifted into something with silver flames and wings that blocked out the moon, he didn't run. He stood beside her and fought with her and loved her even when everyone else called her abomination. Liora's throat tightened. She'd never known her father either. Had been told he died in the same fever that supposedly took her mother. But of course that had been a lie too. Everything had been a lie. The council couldn't allow it, Fenric continued, his voice hardening. A firstborn bloodline continuing? A child who might inherit even stronger powers? They ordered your parents to present themselves for judgment. When your mother refused and tried to run, he stopped. Swallowed hard. My father was the one who led the hunting party. The world tilted. Liora stared at him, trying to process what he'd just said. Your father. Your father killed my mother. My father killed your father. The words came out flat. Dead. Ripped his throat out in front of your mother to make her desperate. To make her sloppy. It worked. She fought like a demon, killed 3 alphas and wounded a dozen more, but grief made her careless. They brought her down with silver chains and wolfsbane poison, and it took 3 days for her to die because her blood kept healing the wounds even as they inflicted new ones. Liora's hands were shaking. She pressed them against the floor to still them, but it didn't help. And me? You were 2 days old. They found you hidden in a cave, wrapped in your mother's cloak and crying hard enough to bring down the mountain. The council wanted to kill you immediately, but his eyes met hers. My father refused. He said you were innocent. That you'd done nothing wrong and killing babies wasn't justice, it was murder. So they compromised. The binding, Liora whispered. Fenric nodded. The most powerful ritual they could perform. 7 alphas, 3 councilmen, and a moon which all working together to wrap chains around your power so tight it could never surface. They buried your wolf so deep you'd never be able to shift. They suppressed your firstborn blood until you'd appear completely human. And then, his voice cracked slightly. Then they placed you here. In the Alpha King's fortress. Where my father could watch you grow up powerless and docile and utterly ignorant of what you could have been. The cruelty of it stole her breath. To take a child and strip away everything that made her special. To force her into a cage of weakness and servitude and watch her struggle her entire life, never understanding why she was different, why she didn't belong, why no one wanted her. Did he know? The question came out barely above a whisper. Your father. Did he know I was his mate? Fenric's expression shuddered. The bond doesn't manifest until physical maturity. By the time you turned 18 and the possibility emerged, my father was already dying. Cancer. Ironic for a shifter, we heal almost everything except that. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. He called me to his deathbed and told me the truth. About you. About what the council suspected. That the prophecy indicated the firstborn's daughter would be bound to the next Alpha King by mate bond, and that bond would either elevate us both to unprecedented power or destroy everything we'd built. What did he tell you to do? Kill you if the bond surfaced. Fenric's eyes burned into hers. End it before it could begin. Choose duty over desire. Be the king he'd raised me to be. His hand reached out, fingers brushing her cheek. And I promised him I would. Swore on his grave that if you were my mate, I'd cut the thread before it could form and find another bond. Someone appropriate. Someone safe. But you didn't. No, the word was anguished. I didn't. Because 3 years ago, on the day of my coronation, I walked into the healer's wing to inspect the facilities and you were there. Grinding herbs in the corner. You didn't even look up, you were so focused on getting the proportions exactly right, your tongue between your teeth in concentration. And I caught your scent, and everything in me he made a helpless gesture. Knew. Leora's heart hammered against her ribs. You've known for 3 years? 3 years I've watched you. Learned your routines. Made excuses to walk past the healer's wing. Created reasons for you to be in the same room even though I never let myself get close enough for you to notice. His voice dropped to something raw. 3 years I've fought this bond. Buried it. Denied it. Took other lovers to try and break it. Nothing worked. And then tonight you looked at me and spoke, and the thread I'd been holding back for years just snapped into place like it had been waiting for permission. The confession hung between them, heavy with implications Liora was only beginning to understand. He'd known. Had watched her serve and scrub and keep her head down, knowing the entire time that she was his mate. Knowing that one word from him could have changed everything. And he'd stayed silent. She should be angry. Should feel betrayed. But through the bond she could feel his torment, the constant war between duty and instinct, between the crown he'd bled for and the mate he'd been ordered to kill. He hadn't been cruel. He'd been protecting her the only way he knew how. By keeping his distance. Why tonight? She asked. Why ask me about the tapestry? Why get close enough for the bond to activate if you'd fought it so long? Fenric's smile was self-deprecating. Because I'm weak. Because it's the lunar convergence and my control was already threadbare. Because you were standing there in candlelight looking at my throne like you were trying to understand what kind of monster would want such a cold seat of power, and he shook his head. I needed to know. Needed to hear your voice directed at me for once instead of just overhearing you talk to others. I told myself it would be fine. One question. One interaction. Then I'd go back to keeping my distance. But the bond had other plans. The bond, he agreed roughly, had very different plans. The moment you said that word handsome, like I was just a man and not a king, something broke open. Or maybe it was already broken and I'd just been pretending it wasn't. Either way, here we are. Here they were indeed. Bound to each other by a force neither of them had chosen. Facing trials that would either unlock her birthright or end her life. And caught in the center of a political nightmare that could destroy a kingdom. I don't feel powerful, Liora said quietly. I don't feel like I could command wolves or shift into silver flames or any of the things you're describing. I feel like what I've always been, nothing. Nobody. A girl who was born wrong and stayed wrong no matter how hard I tried to be good enough. Fenric moved faster than she could track, suddenly kneeling in front of her, his hands cupping her face with a gentleness that seemed impossible for someone so violent. You're not nothing, he said fiercely. You've never been nothing. They made you think you were powerless because your power terrified them. They taught you to be invisible because your visibility would have threatened everything. But Liora, his thumbs brushed away tears she hadn't realized were falling. You survived. 23 years with your power bound so tight it should have killed you, and you survived. That's not weakness. That's strength beyond anything they could understand. I don't know how to access it. Her voice broke. Even if there is power somewhere inside me, I don't know how to find it. And tomorrow I'm supposed to face trials that will kill me if I can't. Then we figure it out together. Fenric leaned forward until their foreheads touched. I can't help you during the trials themselves. But tonight? Tonight I can tell you everything I know about the firstborn. Everything my father told me about your mother. Everything the prophecy says about what you might become. Will it be enough? His eyes closed. I don't know. But it's all we have. So he told her. For hours, while the moon climbed higher and the candles burned lower, Fenric spoke. He told her about the firstborn's abilities, how they didn't just shift into single forms, but could flow between shapes like water, becoming whatever predator the situation required. He told her about her mother's final battle, how witnesses said she'd been a wolf one moment, and something with wings and silver fire the next, and then something with scales and venom. Adapting to each new threat with a fluidity that defied everything they understood about shifting. He told her about the prophecy in detail, how the seer who'd spoken it had died the moment the words left her lips, as if the knowing had burned her from the inside out. About how it claimed the Flamekeeper's daughter would be born without a wolf, but with something older. Something that slept in blood and bone and only woke when faced with impossible choices. The prophecy says you'll stand at the intersection of three paths, Fenric said, his voice rougher now from talking so long. Rule, ruin, or transcend. Rule means you take your place as firstborn queen and unite the packs under your power. Ruin means you destroy everything, tear down the structures, and return us all to chaos. Transcend means he paused. No one knows. The seer died before she could explain that part. Helpful, Liora muttered. His laugh was startled and genuine. Yeah, prophecies are usually terrible about specifics. She wanted to ask more, wanted to understand how she was supposed to rule or ruin or transcend when she couldn't even manifest a basic wolf shift. But exhaustion was pulling at her now, making her thoughts fuzzy and her body heavy. The bond hummed steadily between them, a constant reassurance that she wasn't alone even when everything else felt impossible. Liora, Fenric said softly. There's one more thing you need to know. About the trials. Something in his tone made her tense. What? They're not just tests of power. They're tests of character. Of choice. The first trial is called the Trial of Blood. It'll force you to confront violence and decide what you're willing to sacrifice to survive. The second trial is the Trial of Bonds. It'll test your connections, make you choose between loyalty and freedom. And the third, his jaw clenched. The third trial is the Trial of Sovereignty. It'll make you choose what kind of power you want, whether you'll take the crown or destroy it. And if I make the wrong choice, then you die. His bluntness was almost refreshing after hours of mystical prophecy talk. Each trial has a right answer, a choice that aligns with your true nature. Pick wrong and the magic will burn you out from the inside. Pick right and you move forward, one step closer to whatever you're meant to become. Liora absorbed this, trying to imagine facing impossible choices while also trying not to die. No pressure then. No pressure, he agreed wryly. Then his expression turned serious. But Liora, the most important thing to remember is that the trials will try to break you. They'll show you terrible things, offer you impossible bargains, make you doubt everything you think you know about yourself. And, through all of it, you have to stay true to who you are at your core. I don't even know who that is. His hand found hers in the darkness, fingers lacing together like they'd been made to fit. Then tomorrow you'll find out. Dawn came too quickly and not quickly enough. Liora watched the sun rise through Fenric's window, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold that felt appropriately ominous. She hadn't slept, neither of them had. They'd spent the remaining hours of night sitting close, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing in shared silence, while the bond hummed between them like a living thing. Now, as pale light filtered into the chamber, reality crashed back down with crushing weight. Tonight, she would face the first trial. Tonight, she would either take the first step toward understanding what she really was, or she would die trying. We should go, Fenric said quietly. He'd changed into traveling clothes, dark leather and weapons that made him look every inch the warrior king. But his eyes, when they met hers, were soft with something that made her chest ache. The first trial site is half a day's journey north. In the Whispering Hollow. Liora had heard of the Hollow in stories. A valley where ancient ruins crumbled beneath forest overgrowth, where shifters didn't go because the old magic still clung to the stones and made wolves nervous. A place of power and madness in equal measure. Of course her trial would be there. They left through a private exit, avoiding the main halls where courtiers and warriors would be gathering for the day's duties. Fenric had arranged for horses, massive beasts bred for endurance rather than speed, and they rode out as the fortress was still waking, slipping through gates that guards opened without question at the sight of their king. The journey was quiet at first. Rolling hills gave way to dense forest, and the forest grew darker and older the further north they traveled. Trees here were massive, ancient things with trunks as wide as houses and branches that blocked out most of the sunlight. Moss hung from limbs like ragged curtains, and the air smelled of earth and decay and something else. Something that made the hair on Liora's arms stand up. Old magic. The kind that predated pacts and territories and all the structures shifters had built to contain wildness. "Do you feel that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Speaking louder felt wrong somehow. Like it might wake something better left sleeping. Fenric nodded, his expression grim. The Firstborn's magic. It's woven into the land here. This was one of their sacred places before. He cut himself off. Before your ancestors slaughtered them, Liora finished quietly. His jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. How could he? They were riding toward a trial ground built on genocide and blood, where she would be tested by the ghosts of people her own kind had destroyed. The irony wasn't lost on her. They rode deeper. The forest grew oppressive, branches pressing in from all sides until they were moving through a tunnel of green gloom. Strange sounds echoed from the undergrowth, not quite animal, not quite human. The horses grew skittish, ears flat and eyes rolling white. "Easy," Fenric murmured to his mount, but Liora noticed his hand had moved to the sword at his hip. Then the trees opened up. The Whispering Hollow spread before them like a wound in the earth. A massive circular valley, maybe half a mile across, with ruins scattered throughout like broken teeth. Stone pillars thrust up from the ground at odd angles, covered in symbols that seemed to shift when Liora tried to focus on them. At the center stood what had once been a temple, or maybe a palace. It was impossible to tell with half of it collapsed into rubble. But it was the altar that made Liora's breath catch. It stood in the temple's heart, visible even from the valley's edge. A massive slab of black stone that seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it, and carved into its surface were words that glowed with a silver radiance that had nothing to do with the sun. The words were in a language Liora had never learned. But somehow, impossibly, she could read them. Blood calls to blood. Bone calls to bone. What was taken must be returned. What was buried must rise. Step forward, daughter of flames, and claim your inheritance or burn in the attempt. "Oh gods," she whispered. Fenric's hand found hers. "You don't have to do this. We can run. Right now. I'll take you so far away they'll find us." Liora didn't look away from the altar. "You know they will. And even if they didn't, even if we somehow escaped," she finally turned to meet his eyes. "Could you live with running? Could you really abandon your kingdom? Everything you've built? Everyone who depends on you?" His silence was answer enough. She squeezed his hand once, then released it and dismounted. Her legs were shaky from the long ride, but she forced them steady as she started down into the valley. Behind her, she heard Fenric dismount and follow, his footsteps careful on the uneven ground. The ruins seemed to watch them approach. Liora felt eyes on her from every shadow, every empty doorway, every collapsed wall. Not hostile exactly, but intensely curious. Like the valley itself was aware and waiting to see what she would do. The temple loomed larger as they got closer. Up close, she could see that what she'd taken for weathering and age was actually intentional. The stones were carved with intricate patterns that flowed like water or fire or wind, depending on how the light hit them. And everywhere, were images of creatures that made her head spin trying to understand their forms. Wolves that weren't quite wolves. Bears that were also something else. Birds with too many wings. Serpents with legs. Things that shifted between shapes even in stone, captured in the moment of transformation. The firstborn. They were beautiful, she breathed. They were monsters, Fenric said quietly. But there was no conviction in his voice. Just old stories being repeated by rote. Liora reached out and touched one of the carvings, a creature that seemed to be part wolf, part storm, part living flame. The stone was warm under her palm despite the chill in the air. And the moment her skin made contact, something inside her chest lurched. The bond flared white-hot between her and Fenric, making them both gasp. But underneath that familiar pull was something new. Something older. A connection that had nothing to do with mate bonds and everything to do with blood recognizing blood. "Liora," Fenric said urgently. "Your hand." She looked down and nearly screamed. Silver light was bleeding from her palm where it pressed against the carving. Not reflecting off the stone, coming from inside her skin. It crawled up her arm like living vines, beautiful and terrifying, leaving trails of warmth that felt like coming home and burning alive in equal measure. "It's waking up," she whispered. "Whatever they bound inside me. It's starting to wake up." The light reached her shoulder. Her chest. Spread across her collarbones like a necklace of stars. And with each inch it traveled, Liora felt something shifting inside her. Not painful exactly, but intense. Like chains she hadn't known she was wearing were beginning to crack. "The binding is breaking," Fenric said, his voice caught between awe and terror. "The proximity to the sacred site is dissolving the ritual." "Is that bad?" "I don't know." The light reached her heart and Leora's knees buckled. Fenric caught her before she could hit the ground, lowering them both carefully until she was cradled against his chest while silver fire danced across her skin. "Breathe," he ordered. "Just breathe through it." She tried. Pulled air into lungs that felt too small for the power expanding inside her. It was too much, too big. Her body wasn't meant to contain something this vast. She was going to crack open. Going to shatter into 1,000 pieces of light and bone. But then Fenric's hand pressed against her back, right over her heart, and the mate bond surged to life. It wrapped around the wild power like a tether, didn't suppress it but gave it direction. Gave it a path that wasn't just destruction. The pain eased. The light steadied. And Liora found herself able to breathe again. "Thank you," she gasped against his shoulder. "Always." His arms tightened around her. "I'm here. Whatever happens, I'm here." The silver light faded slowly, sinking back beneath her skin but not disappearing. She could still feel it there, coiled in her chest like a sleeping serpent. Waiting. When she finally felt steady enough to stand, Fenric helped her up and they made their way to the altar together. Up close, the black stone seemed even more impossible, smooth as glass, but covered in those glowing words that she could somehow read despite never having learned the language. "What do I do?" she asked. Fenric shook his head. "I don't know. The records about the trials are fragmentary at best. All I know is that you have to." He froze. His entire body went rigid with predatory awareness, head snapping toward the valley's entrance. A growl built in his chest, low and dangerous. "We're not alone." Liora turned and her blood went cold. They were surrounded. Wolves emerged from the ruins like ghosts, at least 24 of them forming a ring around the temple. But these weren't normal pack wolves. They were massive, each one easily twice the size of any shifter she'd ever seen. And their eyes glowed with that same silver light that had bled from her palm, ancient and knowing and utterly inhuman. "Spirit wolves," Fenric breathed. "The guardians of the firstborn sites. I thought they were extinct." "Apparently not," Liora managed. The largest wolf stepped forward. Its fur was silver shot through with threads of gold, and when it looked at Liora, she felt the weight of its attention like a physical thing. Then it did something impossible. It spoke. Not with a voice, wolves couldn't speak even in shifter form. But inside her head, clear as crystal, she heard words that resonated in her bones. Daughter of Alara. Child of the flame. You stand at the threshold. Behind you lies the life you knew, small and safe and powerless. Before you lies the trial, danger and truth in equal measure. Choose now. Turn back and live in ignorance, or step forward and remember what you are. That's not a choice, Liora said, her voice shaking. That's an ultimatum. All choices are ultimatums. The spirit wolf's eyes burned brighter. We have waited 23 years for you to come. For the binding to weaken. For you to be ready. But readiness is not the same as willingness. So we ask, do you choose to remember? Liora looked at Fenric. He stared back at her with eyes that held love and fear and absolute faith all tangled together. Whatever you choose, he said quietly. I'm with you. She turned back to the spirit wolf. To the altar. To the ruins of a people who'd been destroyed for being too powerful to control. Her people. Her blood. I choose to remember, she said, and the words felt like prophecy. The spirit wolf inclined its massive head. Then place your hand upon the altar and let the first trial begin. Liora stepped forward. The black stone seemed to pulse under her palm, warm and alive. She pressed her hand against it and the world exploded into silver fire. Pain. Not the sharp, clean pain of a wound. This was deeper. Older. Like every cell in her body was being rewritten at once, torn apart and rebuilt into something new. Liora screamed, but no sound came out, or maybe it did, and she just couldn't hear it over the roaring in her ears that sounded like fire and wind and 1,000 voices, all speaking at once. The silver light consumed her. She was burning, but not dying. Drowning, but still breathing. Falling through darkness that was also somehow filled with blinding radiance. And through it all, she felt Fenric's presence through the bond, distant now, muffled, like he was calling to her from the other side of a vast ocean. Then the vision started. She saw her mother. Young and fierce and wreathed in flames that didn't burn, standing atop a mountain with her arms spread wide while lightning danced between her fingers. Power radiated from her in waves that made the air shimmer and the ground shake. This was Alara before the fall. Before the hunt. Before they'd bound her daughter and stolen her legacy. The vision shifted. Now her mother was running through a forest, heavily pregnant and bleeding from a dozen wounds. Behind her, wolves gave chase, normal wolves with normal eyes, but their snarls carried the weight of genocide. And leading them was a massive gray wolf with amber eyes that Liora recognized even though she'd never seen him before. Fenric's father. The Alpha King who'd killed her parents. She watched her mother turn and fight. Watched her shift into forms that shouldn't exist, a wolf that became a bear that became something with wings and claws and silver fire pouring from its jaws. She fought with a desperation born of protecting the life growing inside her. Fought until the gray wolf caught her mate, Liora's father, and tore out his throat in a spray of crimson. Her mother's scream shattered mountains. The power that erupted from her was cataclysmic. Wolves flew backward like leaves in a hurricane. Trees exploded into splinters. The earth itself cracked open, swallowing warriors whole. For a moment it looked like Alara might win, might escape, might save herself and her unborn child and continue the firstborn line. Then the chains came. Silver chains that glowed with ritual magic, thrown by 7 alphas working in concert. They wrapped around her limbs, her throat, her body, and where they touched her skin the silver fire sputtered and died. She tried to shift, but the chains held her in a form that was half wolf, half woman, half something else entirely. Trapped between shapes. Trapped between power and helplessness. Liora felt her mother's agony like it was her own. Felt the life inside her kicking frantically as if the child could sense her mother's terror. Felt the moment Alara made a choice that would echo through decades. With the last of her strength, her mother reached inside herself and pulled. Not at her own power, that was already dying, suppressed by silver and poison. But at her daughters. At the spark of life that carried the firstborn bloodline forward. And she wrapped that spark in layers of protection so dense, so complete, that no one would ever find it. She buried Liora's power so deep it became invisible. Made her daughter human in all the ways that mattered, powerless and ordinary and beneath notice. Because a powerless daughter might survive where a powerful one would be hunted down and destroyed. It was the ultimate sacrifice, not just dying for her child, but ensuring that child would never know what she could have been. The vision shifted again. Liora saw herself as a baby, crying in a cave while her mother's body cooled in the valley below. Saw Fenric's father approach with murder in his eyes and then hesitate. Saw him pick up the screaming infant and make a decision that went against every order he'd been given. He couldn't kill a baby. Wouldn't. Even if that baby carried the blood of his greatest enemies. So he brought her back. Let the council perform their binding ritual, wrapping even more chains around the power her mother had already hidden. Making absolutely certain that Alara's daughter would never wake up. Never shift. Never become what she was meant to be. They'd made her nothing. And she'd believe them. The visions accelerated now, flashing through her life in fragments. Every moment she'd been overlooked. Every time she'd tried so hard to be useful, to be good, to earn a place in a world that had decided she didn't deserve one. Every night she'd laid awake wondering why she felt so wrong in her own skin, like she was wearing a costume that didn't quite fit. Because she had been wearing a costume. A cage made of ritual magic and generational trauma and lies told by people who feared what she might become. But now the cage was cracking. The silver light intensified until Liora couldn't tell where her body ended and the power began. She felt the chains that had bound her since birth, felt them wrapped around her soul like barbed wire. And she understood with sudden, crystal clarity what the first trial actually was. It wasn't a test of strength or skill or combat prowess. It was a test of willingness. Was she willing to break the chains? To tear away the protection her mother had died to give her? To become dangerous and powerful and everything the world had tried to prevent? Because breaking those chains meant there would be no going back. No more hiding. No more being invisible. She would be seen, truly seen, and hunted for it. The peaceful, quiet life she dreamed of would be impossible. She would spend the rest of her existence as a threat, a target, a weapon that everyone wanted to either control or destroy. Her mother had given her the gift of obscurity, of safety through powerlessness. And the trial was asking her to throw that gift away. Choose, the voice of the spirit wolf echoed through the silver fire. Remain bound and live small. Or break free and burn bright. But know this, once the chains are shattered, they cannot be reformed. Once you remember what you are, you cannot forget. Choose carefully, daughter of flames. Choose true. Liora hung suspended in that moment of decision, caught between two impossible futures. Behind her was the life she knew, servitude and silence, and a safety that came from being beneath notice. Ahead was chaos, power she didn't understand, enemies she couldn't fight, and a destiny written in prophecy and blood. She should choose safety. Should choose the quiet life. Should honor her mother's sacrifice by staying bound and hidden and alive. But through the bond, muffled and distant, she felt Fenric. Felt his absolute certainty in her. His faith that she was more than what they'd made her. His belief that she deserved to know the truth of herself even if that truth was dangerous. And beneath that, deeper still, she felt something else. Rage. Not Fenric's rage. Not even her mother's. This was older. This was the collective fury of every firstborn who'd been hunted down and destroyed for the crime of being powerful. Every child whose throat had been cut before they could shift. Every bloodline ended in fire and fear. They'd been slaughtered not because they were evil, but because they were uncontrollable. Because they followed no laws but their own nature. Because they reminded the lesser wolves that dominance could be challenged, that power structures weren't permanent, that the world could be different. And now their last daughter stood at the threshold, deciding whether to honor their genocide by staying small and silent, or to spit in the face of everyone who'd tried to erase her people from history. The choice, when it came, was surprisingly easy. "I choose myself," Liora said into the silver fire. "I choose the truth. I choose to remember. And I choose to make every single person who hurt my mother regret that they didn't kill me when they had the chance." The chain shattered. It felt like dying and being born at the same time. Every binding her mother had placed, every ritual the council had performed, every layer of suppression, they all exploded outward in a wave of silver fire that would have been beautiful if it hadn't been so agonizing. Liora screamed, and this time she heard it, heard her voice crack and break and reform into something that carried harmonics no human throat should produce. Power flooded into spaces that had been empty her entire life. Not a wolf, she'd been right about that. She had no wolf waiting inside her. But she had something else. Something that was every predator and no predator. Something that was form and formlessness. Something that was fire given consciousness and teeth. She was firstborn. And she was awake. The silver light exploded outward from the altar in a shockwave that flattened the remaining temple walls and sent the spirit wolves scrambling backward. Fenric was thrown off his feet, hitting the ground hard and rolling to absorb the impact. When he looked up, his eyes went wide with something between awe and terror. Liora stood at the altar's center, silver flames wreathing her body like a living cloak. Her eyes glowed with that ancient light. Her hair moved in a wind that came from nowhere, or maybe from everywhere, from the power itself seeking expression. And around her, the ruins were waking up. Stone that had been dormant for 300 years began to pulse with light. Symbols carved into walls blazed silver. The ground itself trembled as if something massive was stirring beneath the earth. And the air sang with a frequency that made Fenric's wolf whimper and press flat inside his mind. This was what the firstborn had been. This was the power that had taken armies to suppress. And it was magnificent. But then Liora gasped, stumbling, and the silver fire flickered. Too much too fast. Her body wasn't ready for this. She'd spent 23 years without any power at all, and now she was trying to channel the accumulated strength of an entire extinct bloodline. It was like forcing an ocean through a crack in a dam. She was going to burn out. Fenric moved without thinking, racing toward her even though approaching that much raw power should have killed him. But the bond between them flared to life, recognizing him, and the silver fire parted to let him through. He caught Liora as her legs gave out, pulling her against his chest while power crackled around them both. "Too much," she gasped against his shoulder. "It's too much, I can't." "You can." His hand pressed against her back, over her heart, and he poured his own strength through the bond. Not his power, that would just add to the chaos. But his control. His years of learning to leash his alpha dominance. His hard-won discipline that let him function as a king instead of just a weapon. "Take what you need. Ground yourself in me. Let me be your anchor." Liora's hands fisted in his shirt, and she pulled, drawing his stability into herself like water into parched earth. The bond between them burned hot enough that Fenric felt his own power stirring in response, wanting to rise and meet hers. But he held it down, held himself steady, became the rock she could crash against without breaking them both. Slowly, painfully, Liora's breathing steadied. The silver fire dimmed from blinding to merely bright. Her eyes lost some of their inhuman glow, returning to a color that was mostly their normal deep brown with just hints of silver in the depths. When she finally looked up at him, there was recognition in her gaze again. "Hi," she whispered, and somehow managed a shaky smile. "Hi yourself." He brushed silver-streaked hair back from her face. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been turned inside out and set on fire." Her laugh was slightly hysterical. "But also, right? For the first time in my life, I feel right." Before he could respond, the spirit wolves moved. They closed in around the altar in a tightening circle, their massive bodies radiating approval. The silver wolf who'd spoken before approached until it was close enough to touch, its ancient eyes fixed on Liora with something like satisfaction. "You have passed the first trial," it said directly into their minds. "You chose truth over comfort, power over safety, self over silence. The chains are broken and the bloodline wakes. But know this, daughter of flames, the trials grow harder from here. The second will test what you're willing to sacrifice. The third will test what you're willing to become. And the world beyond these ruins has felt what you've done here. Even now, they gather to stop you." "Who?" Fenric demanded. "The council? Other alphas?" "All of them," the spirit wolf said simply. The moment the binding shattered, every shifter with the sense to feel it knew. The firstborn have returned. And those who feared them most are already moving to ensure history doesn't repeat. As if summoned by the words, howls erupted from the forest surrounding the valley. Not the howls of spirit wolves with their supernatural awareness. These were normal shifter howls, full of rage and fear and killing intent. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. The council had sent an army. Fenric was on his feet instantly, his body positioning itself between Liora and the valley's entrance. "Can you fight?" he asked her quietly. Liora pushed herself upright, silver fire still flickering in her eyes. "I don't know what I can do," she admitted. "I can feel the power, but I don't know how to use it. I don't know how to shift or fight or—" "Then we run." His decision was instant. The trial is past. The first stage is complete. We have 2 more nights before the convergence ends. We get out of here, find somewhere safe, and I teach you everything I know about combat while your power settles. Then we face the second trial ready instead of overwhelmed. The boy speaks wisdom, the spirit wolf said. The firstborn were powerful, but they were not invincible. And you are newly woken, vulnerable in ways you don't yet understand. Go. Run. Learn. The second trial site will find you when it's time. Liora wanted to argue, wanted to stand her ground and prove she wasn't going to run from every threat. But she could already see wolves pouring into the valley from multiple directions, their forms massive and their eyes fixed on the temple with predatory intent. They'd come to kill her before she could grow into her power. And they were right to be afraid. But fear and readiness weren't the same thing. "Okay," she said. "We run." Fenric grabbed her hand and they bolted. The spirit wolves moved with them, forming a protective barrier between them and the approaching army. Silver fire met normal fur and flesh in a clash that sent shockwaves rippling across the valley. Warriors yelped and scattered, buying precious seconds. Fenric and Liora ran for the horses, but before they could reach them, a massive brown wolf landed in their path. The shift was instantaneous, melting into flesh until Councilman Valen stood there in human form, his cold eyes fixed on Liora with absolute hatred. "You've condemned us all," he said softly. "You stupid, selfish girl. You've unleashed something that should have stayed buried forever." "She's unleashed herself," Fenric snarled, his power rising to meet Valen's in a clash that made the air crackle. "And if you try to put her back in chains, you'll have to go through me first." Valen's smile was thin and terrible. "That can be arranged." He shifted mid-lunge, becoming brown fur and snapping jaws that went straight for Fenric's throat. But Fenric was already moving, his own shift flowing like water until he met Valen in the air, 2 massive wolves colliding with a sound like thunder. They hit the ground in a tangle of teeth and claws, rolling and snapping and tearing at each other with a savagery that made Liora's breath catch. Blood sprayed across ancient stone. Fenric's wolf was larger, more powerful, but Valen fought with the desperation of someone who knew exactly what he was fighting for. The end of everything he'd worked to build. The return of chaos his ancestors had died to suppress. More wolves were closing in. Liora could see them converging from all sides, at least 50 warriors and more coming. The spirit wolves were holding the line, but they were being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. In moments, the entire valley would be a bloodbath. She had to do something. But what? She had no training, no control. Just raw power that felt like trying to hold lightning with her bare hands. If she tried to help Fenric, she'd probably hurt him as much as their enemies. If she tried to fight, she'd likely get herself killed. Unless she stopped thinking like someone who needed to know what she was doing. The Firstborn hadn't operated on training and technique. They'd operated on instinct. On letting the power decide what form it needed to take. So she stopped trying to control it. Stopped trying to shape it or direct it or make it behave. She just opened herself to it completely and let it flow. The silver fire exploded from her skin like a star going nova. It wasn't a shift, not exactly. She remained human-shaped, but wrapped in flames that were also solid, also alive, also conscious. Wings erupted from her back, each feather a blade of silver fire. Her hands became claws that dripped light like liquid mercury. And when she opened her mouth to scream, what came out was a sound that made every wolf in the valley freeze in terror. It was the hunting cry of the Firstborn. A sound that hadn't been heard in 300 years. The sound of apex predators announcing themselves. Liora moved. She didn't think about it. Didn't plan it. Her body simply knew what to do, muscle memory written into DNA that predated civilization. She was in the air, wings carrying her across the valley faster than any wolf could run. She landed beside Fenric, silver fire lashing out to catch Valen across the face and send him tumbling backward with a yelp of pain. Then she stood over Fenric's wolf form, wings spread wide, and stared down the army that had come to kill her. "No more running," she said, and her voice carried harmonics that made the earth tremble. "No more hiding. No more letting you decide what I'm allowed to be." The warriors hesitated. Even through their rage and fear, they recognized what stood before them. Their genetic memory screamed warnings that their conscious minds couldn't quite process. This was what their ancestors had fought. This was what they'd nearly destroyed themselves defeating. And it was back. For a moment, the entire valley held its breath. Then Valen's voice cut through the silence. "Kill her. Kill her now before she fully wakes. Before she remembers how to." Leora's roar cut him off. It wasn't a wolf's roar. It wasn't any sound a throat should be able to make. It was fury and power and 300 years of genocide demanding acknowledgement. And when it faded, she spoke words that came from somewhere deep in her bloodline memory. "You hunted my people. You slaughtered my mother. You bound me in chains and taught me I was nothing. But I am awake now. I remember now. And I am done being afraid of you." The silver fire around her intensified until every wolf had to look away or be blinded. "So run," Liora whispered, and the whisper carried across the entire valley like thunder. "Run now. Because the next time you come for me, I'll be ready. And I won't be merciful." For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the first wolf turned and fled. Then another. Then 5 more. The retreat started slowly, but built into a stampede as warriors decided that duty and honor weren't worth dying to stop the return of legends. Within moments, the valley was emptying, wolves pouring back into the forest in a terrified mass exodus. Only Valen remained. He stood in human form again, blood streaming from the burns on his face, staring at Liora with an expression that held no fear. Only grim certainty. "You've won today," he said softly. "But this isn't over. You think this was the world fighting back? This was nothing. Wait until the other alphas gather. Wait until they realize that choosing you means Fenric has chosen sides in a war he can't win. Wait until..." Enough. Fenric had shifted back to human, standing beside Liora with his hand finding hers. "You've delivered your warnings. Now leave. Before I forget that the council is supposed to be untouchable and tear your throat out anyway." Valen's smile was thin. "The convergence lasts 2 more nights. 2 more trials. Do you really think you'll survive them both? Do you really think she's ready for what comes next?" "We'll find out," Liora said quietly. "Together." Valen looked between them at the bond that was now visible even to normal eyes, silver threads connecting their souls. A king who chooses his mate over his kingdom. A firstborn who chooses love over power. This will end in fire and blood and ruin. I promise you that. Then he shifted and was gone, a brown blur disappearing into the forest. Silence fell over the valley. The spirit wolves had withdrawn back into the ruins, their purpose fulfilled. It was just Liora and Fenric standing in the wreckage of the first trial, covered in blood and ash and silver fire, trying to process what had just happened. That, Fenric said finally, was the most terrifying and magnificent thing I've ever seen. Liora looked down at herself. The silver fire had dimmed but not disappeared. It still flickered around her skin like living jewelry. The wings had vanished, but she could feel them coiled inside her, ready to manifest again if needed. And the power, gods, the power was still there, vast and patient and waiting for her to learn how to use it properly. I have no idea what I just did, she admitted. You became what you were always meant to be. Fenric pulled her close, mindless of the silver fire that probably should have burned him, but somehow just felt warm. You became yourself. Liora buried her face against his shoulder and let herself shake. Let the adrenaline and terror and exhilaration all crash through her at once. She'd passed the first trial. She'd broken the chains. She'd faced down an army and sent them running. But Valen was right about one thing. This was only the beginning. They rode until the Whispering Hollow was nothing but a memory behind them. Fenric led them east, away from the fortress, away from the main roads where council warriors might still be searching. The forest here was different, younger, less oppressive, with birdsong filtering through branches that let in actual sunlight. It felt like breathing after being underwater too long. Liora clung to her horse's mane, exhaustion settling into her bones now that the adrenaline had worn off. The silver fire had retreated back beneath her skin, but she could still feel it there, coiled and waiting. Her body ached in places she hadn't known could ache, like her muscles had been torn down and rebuilt slightly wrong. Or maybe slightly right for the first time ever. There, Fenric said, pointing toward a break in the trees. A cave entrance, half hidden by overgrown vines and moss. Not large enough to be a proper den for anything dangerous, but big enough for two people to shelter in. Perfect for hiding while they figured out what came next. They dismounted and Fenric led the horses into the trees where they'd be concealed from casual observation. Then he came back and offered Liora his hand. She took it, grateful for the steady warmth of his touch as they ducked into the cave. Inside was surprisingly dry. Some previous occupant, animal or human, had left behind evidence of habitation. A fire pit lined with stones. Old wood stacked against one wall. Even a rough pallet of dried grass that smelled musty but not rotten. Not exactly a fortress, Fenric said wryly, already moving to build a fire. But it'll keep us hidden until dark. Liora sank down against the cave wall, watching him work. His movements were efficient, practiced, strike the flint, nurse the spark, feed it kindling until flames licked at larger logs. Within minutes, warmth and light filled their shelter, pushing back the shadows. He sat down across from her, the fire between them casting dancing patterns across his face. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They just existed in the crackling silence, processing everything that had happened in the valley. You're staring, Liora said finally. I am. He didn't look away. I'm trying to reconcile the girl who served in my fortress with the woman who roared down an army this morning. They're the same person. Are they? His eyes searched hers. Because from where I'm sitting, you look different. Move different. Even your scent has changed. There's something wild in it now that wasn't there before. Liora lifted her hand, studying it in the firelight. Her skin looked normal, no silver fire, no claws, no wings. But Fenric was right. She felt different. Like she'd been living her entire life in a body that was 2 sizes too small and had finally grown into her proper proportions. I don't know who I am anymore, she admitted quietly. Everything I thought I knew about myself was a lie. The weakness, the powerlessness, her voice cracked. My mother didn't die of fever. My father didn't either. They were murdered. And I've been living with their killers my entire life, serving them, trying so hard to be useful enough that they'd let me stay. Liora, your father ripped out my father's throat. The words came out flat. Factual. And you knew. You've known for 3 years exactly what happened to my family, and you never said anything. Fenric's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. Would you have wanted to know? Would it have helped to understand that the Alpha King who'd taken you and had also orchestrated your parents' deaths? That every kindness shown to you was built on a foundation of genocide? I deserve the truth. You deserve to survive. His voice hardened. And the truth would have gotten you killed. Do you think you could have hidden your rage? Your grief? Someone would have noticed. Someone would have reported it to the council. And they would have ended you quietly before you could become a problem. He was probably right. The realization made her furious and sad in equal measure. So instead I just didn't know. I served and smiled and kept my head down like a good little victim. You survived, Fenric repeated, leaning forward so the firelight caught the fierce intensity in his eyes. In a fortress full of people who would have happily killed you if they'd known what you were, you survived. That's not weakness, Liora. That's strength beyond what most warriors could manage. It doesn't feel like strength. It feels like cowardice. Then you don't understand what courage actually is. He moved around the fire until he was sitting beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and doing what needs to be done anyway. You were alone, powerless, surrounded by enemies, and you still found ways to be kind. To help people. To make yourself useful instead of bitter. That took more courage than any battle I've ever fought. Liora's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to insist that she'd just been trying to survive, that there was nothing noble about it. But the way Fenric looked at her, like she was something precious and fierce and worth protecting, made the words die on her tongue. I'm scared, she whispered instead. Of what I'm becoming. Of what I did in that valley. I felt, she swallowed hard. I felt good when I made them run. When I stood over you and roared and watched them scatter like prey. Part of me wanted to chase them. To hunt. To make them understand what it felt like to be powerless and terrified. That's not wrong. She looked at him sharply. How's that not wrong? I was thinking about hurting people. About being a predator instead of prey, Fenric interrupted gently. Your firstborn, Liora. Apex predator is literally in your blood. You're supposed to feel powerful. Supposed to enjoy the hunt. That doesn't make you a monster, it makes you dangerous. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. He took her hand, threading their fingers together. A monster hurts because it can. A dangerous person hurts when necessary to protect what matters. You didn't chase them. Didn't slaughter them when you could have. You gave them the chance to run and they took it. That's the difference between power and cruelty. Liora wanted to believe him. Wanted to accept that the savage joy she'd felt was normal and not some indication that she was becoming everything the council feared. But doubt gnawed at her. What if I can't control it? She asked. What if the next time I get angry or scared, the power just takes over? What if I hurt someone I don't mean to hurt? Fenric was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing patterns on the back of her hand. Do you trust me? What? It's a simple question. His eyes found hers. Do you trust me? Even knowing what my father did. Even knowing I've been lying to you for 3 years by omission. Even knowing I was supposed to kill you if the bond ever formed. Do you trust me? Liora looked at him, really looked. At the scars crossing his knuckles from battles fought before she'd even arrived at the fortress. At the slight crook in his nose from a break that hadn't healed quite right. At the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes from years of being a king before he'd had time to be a man. He was dangerous. Violent. Built from war and duty and hard choices. Everything about him should have terrified her. But when she reached through their bond, all she felt was steady warmth. Protection. An absolute certainty that he would burn the world down before he let anyone hurt her again. Yes, she said. I trust you. Something in his expression softened. Then trust me when I say this, you're not going to lose control. Because I won't let you. How can you promise that? Because of this. He pressed his palm against her chest, right over her heart where the bond burned brightest. You're not alone in your head anymore. I'm here. And if you start to spiral, if the power starts to overwhelm you, I'll pull you back. That's what mates do, we balance each other. Your power. My control. Together, we're stronger than either of us could be apart. That's a lot of faith to put in a bond that activated less than 24 hours ago. His smile was crooked. I've had 3 years to believe in this bond. To feel it growing stronger every day even while I tried to deny it. Trust me, Liora, we're meant for this. Meant for each other. And meant to face whatever comes next together. Liora leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder while the fire crackled and shadows danced across cave walls. Through the bond, she felt his steady heartbeat, felt his certainty wrapping around her doubts like a shield. It would be so easy to let him carry this weight, to let him be strong while she figured out how to use her power without destroying everything. But that wasn't partnership. That was just trading one form of dependence for another. I need to learn to fight, she said quietly. Not just how to use my power, but actual combat. Strategy. How to defend myself when the silver fire isn't enough. Agreed. Fenric shifted, so he could look at her properly. We have until sunset. That's not much time, but I can teach you basics. How to read an opponent's body language. Where to strike for maximum damage. How to kill. Liora finished, and was surprised by how steady her voice was. Because that's what the next trial might require. What this whole situation might require. I need to be able to kill if necessary. Fenric studied her face for a long moment. Most people hesitate before crossing that line. Before acknowledging that violence might be their only option. Most people didn't watch their entire worldview shatter in the span of a day. Liora met his gaze unflinchingly. I've been prey my whole life, Fenric. Weak and scared and constantly at someone else's mercy. I'm done with that. If someone comes for me for us, I want to be able to fight back. Really fight back. Not just with power I don't understand, but with skill and strategy and... She stopped, realizing how bloodthirsty she sounded. But Fenric just smiled, not his polite king smile, but something sharper. Prouder. There she is, he said softly. There's my queen. I'm not a queen. Not yet. He stood, offering her his hand. But you will be. Whether you claim the title officially or not, you're going to end up leading something. Your power demands it. Your bloodline demands it. So let's make sure you're ready. Liora took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. Her body protested. She was still exhausted, still aching from the trial, but adrenaline was starting to creep back in. Anticipation mixed with nervousness. First lesson, Fenric said, moving to the cave's entrance where there was more space. Fighting isn't about being stronger than your opponent. It's about being smarter. Reading their movements, anticipating their strikes, using their momentum against them. He demonstrated, moving through basic defensive stances with a fluid grace that made it look easy. Your advantage isn't going to be raw strength. Most male shifters will outmatch you there even with your firstborn power. Your advantages are speed, unpredictability, and the fact that you can shift into forms they won't expect. Can I though? Liora asked. I managed those wings this morning, but I have no idea how I did it. It just happened. Then we practice until it doesn't just happen, until you can call it at will. He gestured for her to join him. Try now. Try to manifest the wings again. Liora closed her eyes and reached for the power coiled in her chest. It responded immediately, rising toward the surface with an eagerness that was almost frightening. But when she tried to shape it into wings, tried to remember the sensation of silver fire and feathers, nothing happened. She opened her eyes to find Fenric watching her with patient amusement. It's not working, she said, frustration bleeding into her voice. Because you're trying to force it. You're thinking about what you want the power to do instead of just letting it flow. He moved behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders. Close your eyes again. Don't try to create wings. Just think about flying. About freedom. About being untouchable. His voice was low, almost hypnotic. Liora let herself sink into it, let the words paint pictures in her mind. Flying. Soaring above danger. Being fast enough that no one could catch her, high enough that no one could reach her. The power surged. This time, instead of trying to direct it, she just opened herself to it completely. Let it decide what form was needed for the image in her head. And the wings erupted from her back in a rush of silver fire that made Fenric stumble backward with a startled laugh. There, he said, pride clear in his voice. Now try to hold them. Feel how the power moves, how it maintains the shape. Liora focused on the wings, on the way they felt like an extension of her body, but also somehow separate. Living fire that responded to her will, but had its own consciousness. She could feel each feather, sense how they caught the air even though they were inside a cave with no wind. Now dismiss them, Fenric instructed. Pull the power back in. That was harder. The wings didn't want to go away. They wanted to be used, to stretch, to carry her into the sky. But Liora pulled firmly at the power and, reluctantly, it retreated. The wings dissolved back into silver fire that sank beneath her skin. Good, Fenric said. Again. They practiced for hours. Wings. Claws. Fire that she could shape into shields or weapons. Each time got a little easier, a little faster. The power still felt vast and unwieldy, but she was starting to understand its rhythms. How it responded to emotion more than conscious thought. How anger made it sharp and dangerous, while fear made it defensive, protective. Between exercises, Fenric taught her to fight. How to block. How to dodge. How to use an opponent's size against them by staying low and mobile. How to target vulnerable points, throat, eyes, joints. How to kill quickly if it came to that, because hesitation in combat meant death. He was a patient teacher, but also demanding. When she moved too slowly, he corrected her. When her form was sloppy, he demonstrated again until she got it right. And when she managed to actually land a hit on him, a sweep of her leg that caught him off balance and sent him stumbling, his grin was pure savage approval. Better, he said, circling her with predatory grace. But you telegraphed the move. I saw it coming and let you land it to build your confidence. In a real fight, I would have countered and you'd be on your back. Show me, Liora challenged, surprising herself with the boldness. Fenric's eyes gleamed. You sure? I won't go easy this time. I don't want you to go easy. He moved. One moment he was 3 feet away, the next he was inside her guard, his arm hooking behind her knee while his other hand pressed against her shoulder. She went down hard, the cave floor knocking the breath from her lungs. Before she could recover, Fenric was over her, his weight pinning her down, his hand around her throat in a grip that was firm but not dangerous. Dead, he said quietly. In a real fight, this would be over. Liora's heart hammered. She should be frightened. She was trapped, vulnerable, completely at his mercy. But all she could focus on was the heat of his body against hers, the way his eyes had gone molten gold with predatory satisfaction, the bond between them humming with an intensity that had nothing to do with combat training. Get off me, she breathed. Make me. It was a challenge and an invitation all at once. Liora reached for her power and felt it respond instantly, silver fire crackling across her skin. Fenric's eyes widened and he started to pull back, but she was faster. Her hand came up, catching his wrist, and power flowed between them. Not attacking. Just connecting. The bond exploded into something new. Suddenly Liora could feel everything he was feeling. The desire that had been simmering under his surface all day. The pride in her progress. The constant low-level fear that he was going to lose her before he'd really had the chance to have her. The overwhelming need to claim and protect and possess that came with being an alpha and having found his mate. And beneath it all, softer but no less intense love. He loved her. Had loved her for 3 years while watching from a distance. Had fallen for the way she hummed while grinding herbs. The way she always tried to help even when she was exhausted. The quiet strength in her that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with refusing to let cruelty make her cruel in return. Fenric, she whispered, and his name on her lips sounded like a prayer. He kissed her. Not like the desperate claiming from last night. This was different, slower, deeper, full of emotions that had been building for years and were finally allowed expression. His hand moved from her throat to cup her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. And Liora kissed him back with everything she had, pouring her own tangled feelings through the bond. Gratitude for believing in her. Fear of losing him. Wonder that someone could look at her and see not a broken thing but something precious. And yes, underneath it all, desire that made her body ache in entirely new ways. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Fenric rested his forehead against hers. "We should stop," he said roughly. "You need rest." "We both do. And starting something we can't finish when we're being hunted would be stupid," Liora agreed. But she didn't pull away. Couldn't make herself create distance when being close to him felt like the only stable thing in her rapidly shifting world. "Fenric. Yeah. Thank you. For teaching me. For being patient. She swallowed hard. For seeing me when no one else did." His arms tightened around her. "Always," he promised. "No matter what happens in the trials. No matter what you become or what choices you have to make. I see you, Liora. All of you. And I'm not going anywhere." They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped around each other on the cave floor while the fire burned low and shadows lengthened outside. Eventually they moved back to the fire, building it up again, sharing dried meat and water from Fenric's pack. The conversation drifted to lighter things. He told her about growing up as an Alphazair, the brutal training, the constant tests, the pressure to be perfect because any weakness would be exploited. She told him about the healer's wing, about the old woman who'd taught her herbs and never asked why she couldn't shift, who'd been kind in ways that had kept Liora sane. "She died 2 years ago," Liora said quietly. "Heart failure. One day she was teaching me about willow bark tea, the next she was just gone. I cried for 3 days and no one understood why I was so upset over a servant's death." "She mattered to you," Fenric said. "That's reason enough." As the sun began to set outside their cave, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Liora felt something shift. Not in her power, that remained constant, humming beneath her skin, but in herself. In her understanding of who she was becoming. She wasn't the girl who'd served in the healer's wing anymore. But she also wasn't just the firstborn prophesied to either save or destroy the world. She was something in between. Something new. A woman who'd been powerless and was learning to wield strength. Who'd been silent and was finding her voice. Who'd been prey and was becoming predator without losing her compassion in the transformation. "Tomorrow's the second trial," she said, watching the last light fade from the sky. "Tomorrow," Fenric agreed. "The trial of bonds. It'll test your connections. Make you choose between loyalty and freedom. What do you think that means?" He was quiet for a moment. "I think it means you'll have to decide what matters more, your bond to me or your independence. Your connection to the past or your future. The trial will probably try to make you choose." Liora's hand found his. "And if I refuse to choose? If I want both? Then you'll have to fight for both." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against her knuckles. "And I have complete faith that you will." Outside, the convergence moon began to rise. Silver light flooded the forest, turning everything ethereal and strange. And somewhere in that light, Liora felt something calling to her. The second trial site, waking up. Waiting for her to come face whatever impossible choice it had prepared. But tonight she had this. This cave. This fire. This man who looked at her like she was both salvation and damnation, and loved her anyway. Tomorrow could bring what it would. Tonight, she was exactly where she needed to be. The calling came at midnight. Liora woke from restless sleep to find silver moonlight flooding the cave entrance, brighter than any natural light should be. Beside her, Fenric was already awake, his body tense with predatory awareness as he stared at the luminous pathway cutting through the forest. "It's time," he said quietly. They gathered their things in silence, what little they had. Weapons. Water. The knowledge that whatever came next would either elevate them or end them. There was no middle ground anymore. No safe path through the convergence trials. The moonlight led them north and west, deeper into ancient forest where the trees grew so massive their roots formed networks above ground like architectural arches. Everything was bathed in that eerie silver glow, making the world feel suspended between reality and dream. Even the normal sounds of night creatures had fallen silent, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. "Do you feel that?" Liora whispered. Fenric nodded grimly. "We're being watched." She felt it too, eyes in the darkness. Not hostile exactly, but intensely observant. The forest was aware of them, tracking their progress toward whatever destiny the trial had prepared. Her power hummed beneath her skin, responding to the convergence magic saturating the air. They walked for over an hour before the trees opened up. What lay beyond made Liora's breath catch. A lake. Perfectly circular, maybe 200 yards across, with water so still it looked like polished obsidian. And in its exact center stood a structure that shouldn't exist, a temple of white stone that seemed to float on the water's surface without any visible foundation. Pillars rose toward the sky, their surfaces carved with the same shifting symbols she'd seen in the Whispering Hollow. And connecting the shore to the temple was a bridge made entirely of moonlight, solid enough to walk on but translucent, like frozen starlight. "The Temple of Reflections," Fenric said, his voice carrying notes of awe and dread. "I thought it was a myth. Stories said the firstborn built it to test their young, to force them to confront their own hearts before they could claim adult power." The trial of bonds, Liora breathed, remembering what he'd told her. A test of connections. Of loyalty versus freedom. As if responding to her words, figures began to materialize on the opposite shore. Liora's heart stopped. There were at least 50 of them, shifters in human form, standing in a semicircle around the lake's far edge. She recognized some faces from the fortress. Warriors. Courtiers. Members of the High Council. All of them staring across the water with expressions that ranged from fear to fury to grim determination. And standing at their center, robed in ceremonial silver, was Councilman Valen. Alpha King Fenric Blackthorn. Valen's voice carried across the water with unnatural clarity, amplified by the convergence magic. "You stand at a crossroads. The second trial requires a choice, not from your mate, but from you." Fenric's entire body went rigid. "What?" "The trial of bonds tests all connections, not just hers." Valen's smile was cold in the moonlight. "And you, great king, have the most important choice of all to make. Your kingdom," he gestured to the assembled crowd behind him. "Or your mate." "That's not a choice," Fenric snarled. "That's an ultimatum." "All choices are ultimatums," Valen said, echoing the spirit wolf's words from the first trial. "You can cross that bridge. You can stand beside her as she faces whatever the temple demands. You can choose your bond over your crown, your mate over your people, your heart over your duty." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But if you do, these warriors have orders to march on your fortress, to claim it in the name of the High Council, to install a new Alpha King, one who understands that personal desire cannot supersede the safety of 7 territories. By the time you complete the trial and return, your kingdom will belong to another. Everyone you've protected, every pact you've united, every treaty you've negotiated, gone. And you'll be nothing but a rogue king with no territory and no authority to protect the mate you chose over everything else." The words landed like physical blows. Liora felt Fenric's anguish through their bond, felt the war raging inside him as duty and love tore at each other like rabid animals. This was the choice the trial had prepared. The impossible decision that would define everything that came after. Or, Valen continued, his voice deceptively gentle, you can stay here. Let her cross alone, as the trials were meant to be faced. Maintain your authority. Keep your kingdom safe. And trust that if she's truly meant to survive, she will. Without you. You bastard, Fenric breathed. This isn't about the trials. This is about separating us. About making sure I can't protect her when the trial demands its price? Valen's smile widened. Yes. The second trial always requires sacrifice. Something precious given up willingly. And we want to ensure that the sacrifice she makes is appropriate. That her choice reflects her true nature rather than being influenced by her mate's presence. Liora's stomach dropped. She understood now. This wasn't just about testing bonds, it was about isolating her. Making sure that when the temple demanded its sacrifice, she'd have no one to anchor her. No one to remind her who she was. Just ancient magic and impossible choices, and a prophecy that said she'd either rule, ruin, or transcend. And they were terrified of which path she'd choose. Don't do this, Fenric said, his voice dropping into registers that made the water ripple. Don't make me choose between. We're not making you choose anything, Valen interrupted smoothly. The trial is. We're simply ensuring the choice is real. That you can't have both your crown and your mate. That you have to decide which actually matters more. Fenric turned to Liora, his eyes wild with desperation and rage. I can't leave you. If I stay here, if I don't cross with you, you lose everything you've built, Liora finished quietly. The realization settled over her like ice water. Everyone depending on you. Every pack that trusts you to keep them safe. All of it gone because you chose one person over thousands. I choose you. His hands framed her face, fierce and certain. Every time I choose you. The kingdom can. The kingdom can't wait. Her voice was steadier than she felt. Fenric, listen to me. If you cross that bridge, we both lose. They'll take your crown and you'll have nothing, no authority, no resources, no way to protect me once these trials are over. But if you stay, she swallowed hard. If you stay, you keep your power. Keep your kingdom. And when I come back, if I come back, we'll face whatever comes next from a position of strength instead of as refugees with nowhere to run. You're asking me to abandon you. I'm asking you to trust me. She pressed her hand against his chest, feeling his heart thunder beneath her palm. You said I was strong enough to face this. You said you had faith in me. So have faith now. Let me do this alone. Through the bond, she felt his agony. Felt him searching for any other option, any alternative that didn't require choosing between the two things he loved most in this world. But there was no alternative. That was the entire point of the trial, to force impossible choices and see what broke. I can't, he said roughly. I can't just stand here and watch you walk into danger knowing I could. Be the king you were born to be, Liora interrupted. That's what you can do. That's what you have to do. Because if we're going to survive what comes after these trials, if we're going to have any chance at a life together, we need you to still be Alpha King. We need you to have the power to protect us both. She was right and they both knew it. But knowing didn't make it hurt less. Fenric pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair. Come back to me, he whispered. Whatever the trial demands, whatever sacrifice it requires, don't you dare not come back to me. I'll try. It was all she could promise. I'll fight with everything I have. And if I do come back, her voice broke slightly. I want to come back to a king, not a rogue alpha on the run. So stay. Keep your crown. And wait for me. She pulled away before she could change her mind, before her own fear could overwhelm her resolve. The moonlight bridge beckoned, solid and ethereal and terrifying. She took the first step onto it and felt the magic respond, recognizing her bloodline, welcoming her home to a place built by her ancestors. Behind her, Fenric made a sound that was half growl, half sob. But he didn't follow. He stayed rooted to the shore while she walked away from him, each step carrying her closer to the temple and further from the one person who made her feel safe. The bridge was longer than it looked. With each step, Liora felt the pull of the mate bond stretching between them like an elastic band being drawn taut. It didn't break, mate bonds didn't break, but the separation hurt in ways she hadn't anticipated. Like leaving part of herself behind on that shore. She didn't look back. Couldn't. If she saw his face, saw the devastation in his eyes, she'd turn around and damn the consequences. The temple loomed larger. Up close, she could see that the white stone wasn't carved, it was grown, like bone or coral, forming organic shapes that suggested architecture without following any rules of physics she understood. The entrance was a massive archway that seemed to lead into darkness, despite the moonlight saturating everything else. Liora stepped through. The darkness swallowed her whole. For a moment there was nothing, no sight, no sound. Not even the feeling of ground beneath her feet. Just absolute void. Then light bloomed, not from any source she could identify, but from everywhere at once, revealing a chamber that made her head spin trying to comprehend its dimensions. It was circular. Or maybe spherical. Or possibly both simultaneously. The walls were mirrors, but not like any mirrors she'd seen before. They showed reflections that moved independently, living alternate versions of herself doing things she hadn't done, making choices she hadn't made. In one mirror, she saw herself as she'd been yesterday, wolfless and powerless, head down, serving in the healer's wing with quiet desperation. In another, she was wreathed in silver flames, standing over a battlefield of corpses with a crown of bones on her head and madness in her eyes. In a third, she was peaceful and powerful both, surrounded by others like her firstborn who'd somehow survived, rebuilding what had been destroyed. Dozens of reflections. Hundreds. Each one showing a possible path, a potential future, a choice that would lead to that outcome. Welcome, daughter of Alara. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, female and ancient and sad. Welcome to the place where bonds are tested and truth is revealed. Who are you? Liora called into the shifting light. I am what remains of the firstborn collective consciousness. The gathered memories of all who came before, preserved in this place so that our children might learn from our mistakes. The voice paused. You are the first to enter this temple in 300 years. The last was your mother when she was younger than you are now. Liora's throat tightened. What happened to her? She passed the trial. Chose connection over isolation, love over power, vulnerability over strength. And it made her magnificent. The voice held notes of pride and grief. It also made her a target. Because those who choose love will always threaten those who choose control. The mirrors began to shift, coalescing into a single massive reflection directly ahead. And in that reflection, Liora saw not herself but her mother. Young and beautiful and alive, standing in this same chamber, making a choice that would define her entire life. The trial of bonds requires sacrifice, the voice continued. Something precious given up willingly. Your mother sacrificed her safety, her anonymity, her chance to hide among lesser wolves and live a quiet life. She chose to be seen, to love openly, to bear a child even knowing that child would be hunted. That was her sacrifice, security for the sake of authenticity. The image shifted, showing Alara years later, running through the forest with her mate, both of them laughing despite the danger. Happy, free, alive in ways that transcended mere survival. Now you must choose what you will sacrifice, the voice said. The trial has already begun. Already you've sent away the one person who makes you feel safe. That was wise and painful. But it's not enough. The real sacrifice comes now. The mirrors exploded into new visions. In one, Liora saw herself choosing power. Embracing her firstborn nature completely, becoming the prophesied queen who would unite the packs through sheer dominance. She was magnificent in this vision, terrible and beautiful and absolutely in control. But she was also alone. Fenric was gone, unable to stand beside someone whose power dwarfed his own. And her eyes held none of the warmth she recognized as herself. In another mirror, she saw herself choosing love, rejecting the prophecy, suppressing her power, binding it again willingly just to be able to live a normal life with Fenric. They were happy in this vision, truly happy. But her power turned inward, eating at her from the inside, until she aged rapidly and died young while he was still in his prime. And the world burned without her there to stop it. In a third, she saw herself choosing freedom, walking away from Fenric, from the trials, from all of it. Living alone in wild places, shifting into forms no one had seen in centuries, powerful and untouchable and utterly isolated. She survived in this vision. But she never truly lived. Choose, the voice commanded. Power, love, or freedom. You cannot have all three. The trial demands you understand this truth, that every path requires sacrifice. That becoming who you're meant to be means losing some part of who you are. So choose, daughter of flames. What matters most? Liora stared at the three visions, her heart hammering. This was the test. The impossible choice designed to break her. Choose power and lose love. Choose love and lose herself. Choose freedom and lose everything. But something about the choice felt wrong. No, she said quietly. The voice paused. No, louder now, more certain. These aren't my only options. You're showing me extremes, three paths that all end in some form of death or isolation or loss. But that's not how life works. That's not how choices work. There are always more than three paths. The prophecy speaks of three. The prophecy, Liora interrupted, her power beginning to rise, says I'll rule, ruin, or transcend. And you've just shown me the first two. Rule through power. Ruin through love consuming me. But transcend, she turned to face where she thought the voice was coming from, even though it surrounded her. Transcend means going beyond the choice entirely. Finding a fourth path that nobody thought was possible. There is no fourth path. Then I'll make one. The silver fire erupted from her skin, not wild this time but controlled. Directed. She turned to face all three visions at once. I choose all of it. Power and love and freedom. Not perfectly, not without cost, but together. Because the only way forward isn't through sacrifice, it's through integration. Through being whole instead of fractured. The mirrors cracked. Not shattering, but splintering into thousands of pieces that were formed into something new. Something that showed her not as three separate futures, but as one integrated whole, powerful and loving and free, all at once. It wouldn't be easy. It would require constant balance, constant choice, constant willingness to be more than any single role or expectation. But it was possible. You reject the trial's premise, the voice said, and now it sounded almost pleased. You refuse to diminish yourself to fit the expected patterns. That is unexpected. I'm full of surprises. Liora's smile was sharp. So what now? Do I fail for not choosing? Do I die for breaking the rules? No, daughter of Valera. The voice was definitely pleased now. You transcend. Just as the prophecy foretold. Not by choosing one path over others, but by refusing to accept that limitation in the first place. You are more than any single destiny. More than any prophecy can contain. And that the temple began to shimmer, light building in intensity. That makes you dangerous in ways even the firstborn never were. Is that good or bad? That depends entirely on what you do with it. The light became blinding. Liora felt herself being pulled backward, toward the temple entrance, toward the moonlight bridge and the shore beyond. But before she fully materialized, the voice spoke once more. Your mother's sacrifice was security for authenticity. Yours is different. You sacrifice certainty for possibility. The comfort of knowing your path for the terror of creating your own. That is the price of transcendence. You must walk roads no one has mapped. And you will be alone in ways even your mate cannot share. Then she was standing on the bridge again, moonlight solid beneath her feet, the temple behind her dissolving into mist. The trial was complete. But when she looked toward the shore where Fenric had been, her heart stopped. He wasn't alone anymore. At least 20 warriors surrounded him, weapons drawn, forcing him to his knees on the ground. And standing over him with a silver blade pressed against his throat was Valen, his expression triumphant. "Welcome back," Valen called across the water. "Congratulations on passing the second trial. I'm sure you're very proud. But I'm afraid there's been a development while you were inside." Liora started running across the bridge, power already rising. "The High Council has voted," Valen continued, pressing the blade harder until a thin line of blood appeared on Fenric's throat. "Your mate has been deemed unfit to rule. His obsession with you, his willingness to risk everything for a single person, proves he can no longer put the kingdom first. So we're relieving him of his crown. And his life." "No." The word tore from Leora's throat as she reached the shore. Silver fire exploded around her, wings manifesting, claws extending. "You touch him and You'll what?" Valen smiled coldly. "Kill us all? Prove that the firstborn are exactly the monsters we've always said they were? Go ahead. Slaughter everyone here. But know that the moment you do, every pack in 7 territories will turn against you. You'll be hunted until the day you die. You'll never be safe, never be accepted, never be anything but the thing that destroyed the Alpha King." Liora froze, power crackling around her, caught in yet another impossible choice. Save Fenric and become the monster they feared. Or watch him die and prove she could control herself. Through the bond, she felt Fenric's desperate plea. "Run. Save yourself. Don't let them make you into what they think you are." But she also felt something else. A third option opening up. Not in the trial this time, in reality. Because she'd just spent an hour in that temple learning that impossible choices only stayed impossible if you accepted their premises. And she was done accepting other people's premises. "Councilman Valen," she said quietly, and the silver fire began to change, shifting from weapon to something else entirely. "You're right. I could kill everyone here. Could burn you all to ash and not even break a sweat." His eyes widened slightly, uncertainty creeping into his expression. "But I won't," Liora continued, and now her power was flowing outward, not attacking but surrounding, enveloping, offering. "Because I'm not interested in ruling through fear. I'm not interested in being the monster you think I am. I'm interested in something none of you have even considered. Which is partnership." The word hung in the air like a benediction. "You're terrified of me because you think I want to take everything from you. But what if I don't? What if instead of destroying your power structures, I work within them? What if instead of being your enemy, I become your ally? You expect us to believe." "I expect nothing," Liora interrupted. "But I'm offering everything. My power, used to protect these territories instead of conquer them. My knowledge, shared freely instead of hoarded. My strength, defending rather than attacking. In exchange for one thing. Your mate's life," Valen said flatly. "His freedom," Liora corrected. "And recognition of our bond. You can keep your councils and hierarchies and rules. I don't want to rule. But I also won't be controlled. So here's my offer. Fenric remains Alpha King. I remain his mate. And together, we create something new. A kingdom that has room for both the old ways and the new. For both wolves and firstborn." "That's impossible." "So was me," Liora said simply. "So was surviving with my power bound for 23 years. So was passing the trials. I'm done accepting impossible as an answer. So you choose, Councilman. Do you kill us both here and spend the rest of your life wondering if cooperation might have worked? Or do you take a chance on something that's never been tried before?" The silence stretched. Every eye was on Valen, waiting to see which path he'd choose. The blade at Fenric's throat trembled slightly. And in that moment, Liora felt the weight of destiny shifting. This was the real test. Not in the temple. Here. Now. In the messy reality of politics and fear and people trying to do what they thought was right even when they were terribly wrong. "Stand down," Valen said finally. The warriors hesitated, confused. "I said stand down." His voice cracked like a whip. "Release the Alpha King. They obeyed, weapons lowering, hands releasing Fenric's shoulders. He stood slowly, blood still trickling from his throat, his eyes locked on Liora with an expression that held love and pride and absolute wonder. Valen lowered his blade. "This isn't over," he said quietly to Liora. "This is a provisional truce while we see if your words match your actions. But know this, one wrong move, one hint that you're becoming the threat we fear, and this offer dies with you." "Understood." "Understood," Liora agreed. "And know this in return, I keep my promises. All of them. So if you honor this truce, I will too. But if you betray it," her smile was sharp, "you'll learn exactly why your ancestors were so terrified of mine." Valen held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "Come. We return to the fortress. All of us. And tomorrow," he looked up at the convergence moon, still bright overhead. "Tomorrow you face the final trial. And we'll see what you truly become." The fortress felt different when they returned. Word had spread, somehow impossibly fast, about what had happened at the Temple of Reflections. About the impossible choice Liora had offered and Valen's acceptance of it. The corridors buzzed with whispers that died the moment she passed. Eyes tracked her movement, not with the dismissive glances she'd grown used to, but with wary fascination. Fear and curiosity in equal measure. She was no longer invisible. They gave her chambers in the royal wing. Not servants' quarters tucked away in forgotten corners, but rooms with tall windows and stone fireplaces and tapestries that probably cost more than she'd earned in her entire life. It felt wrong, like wearing someone else's skin. But Fenric had insisted, and after everything, she didn't have the energy to argue. The final trial would come at midnight, the third and last night of the convergence. One more test, and this would all be over one way or another. Liora stood at her window, watching the sunset in shades of crimson and gold, and tried not to think about what failure would mean. Tried not to calculate how many ways she could die in the next few hours. Tried not to feel the weight of an entire kingdom's expectations pressing down on her shoulders like a physical thing. A knock at the door pulled her from spiraling thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Fenric or maybe a servant with food she wouldn't be able to eat. Instead, it was a young woman, maybe 16, with nervous eyes and a healer's apprentice uniform that Liora recognized because she'd worn the same thing for years. The girl clutched a small bundle wrapped in cloth, her hands trembling slightly. "Forgive the intrusion, my lady," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know you don't remember me, but I worked in the healer's wing. You taught me how to properly measure feverfew doses when I first started. You were kind when everyone else said I was too clumsy to ever be useful." Liora's throat tightened. She did remember. Mira, her name was. Always dropping things, always apologizing, always trying so hard to be good enough. Liora had seen herself in the girl and had tried to help where she could. "I remember," Liora said gently. "You're not clumsy, Mira. You were just nervous. How are you doing?" The girl's eyes filled with tears. "Better, because of you. And I heard about tonight. About the final trial. Everyone's saying it's going to be the hardest one. That you might not," she cut herself off, swallowing hard. "I wanted to give you this. Before. Just in case." She held out the cloth bundle with shaking hands. Liora took it carefully and unwrapped it to reveal a small carved wooden wolf, no bigger than her palm. The craftsmanship was crude but earnest, every line carved with obvious care and attention. "My brother made it," Mira explained. "Before he died in the border wars 3 years ago. He always said it was his good luck charm. That as long as he carried it, he'd come home safe." Her voice cracked. "He didn't have it with him that day. He'd given it to me before he left, said I needed the luck more than he did. And I want you to have it now. For tonight." Liora stared at the small carved wolf, at this precious thing being offered to her by someone who had so little to give. "Mira, I can't take this. It's too important to you." "You're important," the girl said fiercely, wiping at her tears. "You're the only person in this whole fortress who ever looked at me like I mattered. like I was more than just another disposable servant. So please, take it, and come back safe. The words broke something in Leora's chest. This girl, this nervous, clumsy, kind girl, had just summarized everything Liora had been trying to articulate to Valen. That power wasn't just about strength or dominance. It was about seeing people, about making them feel like they mattered. Thank you, Liora whispered, closing her fingers around the carved wolf. I'll bring it back to you. I promise. Mira nodded, managing a watery smile, then slipped out as quietly as she'd come. And Liora stood there holding a dead boy's good luck charm, feeling the weight of promises she might not be able to keep. The hours crawled past. Fenric came as the moon began to rise, his presence filling the doorway before he even spoke. The cut on his throat had healed already, shifter metabolism, but Liora could still see the ghost of it in her mind. How close she'd come to losing him. How easily Valen's blade could have pressed just a little harder. You're brooding, he said, moving to stand beside her at the window. I'm thinking. Same thing for you. His hand found hers, threading their fingers together. What about? About how many people are depending on me to not fail tonight. About how I still don't really know what I'm doing. About how the prophecy says I'll either rule, ruin, or transcend, and I've apparently chosen transcend, which means walking a path nobody's mapped. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. No pressure. Fenric pulled her around to face him, his hands settling on her shoulders. Listen to me. You're going to walk into that trial tonight and face whatever impossible tests they've designed. And you're going to do it the same way you've done everything else, by being exactly who you are. Not who they expect. Not who the prophecy says. Just you. Liora. The woman who survived 23 years of being told she was nothing and still managed to be kind. That's your power. Not the silver fire or the wings or any of the firstborn abilities. Your power is that you refuse to let cruelty make you cruel. What if that's not enough? It will be. He said it with such absolute certainty that she almost believed him. Because you're not facing this alone. I can't walk into the trial with you, the magic won't allow it. But I'll be there. Right outside. And every moment you're in there, you'll feel me through the bond. Feel me believing in you. Feel me knowing you're going to survive this, because you're the strongest person I've ever met. Liora leaned into him, pressing her face against his chest and breathing in his scent, pine and smoke and home. I'm terrified, she admitted. Good. Fear means you understand the stakes. It means you're taking this seriously. His arms tightened around her. But don't let the fear consume you. Don't let it make you small again. You've spent your whole life being afraid, Liora. Tonight, be fierce instead. She pulled back enough to look up at him. If I don't come back, you will. But if I don't, she insisted. If something goes wrong and the trial claims me, promise me you won't let this break you. Promise me you'll keep being the king these people need. That you won't. He kissed her. Hard and desperate and absolutely final. You're coming back, he said against her lips. Because I'm not done with you yet. Because we're going to have a lifetime together, and it starts after you pass this trial, and we figure out what building something new actually looks like. So no goodbyes. No final words. Just, I'll see you soon. The moonlight outside intensified, turning from silver to brilliant white. The convergence had reached its peak. Midnight had arrived. It was time. They walked together through the fortress, a strange procession forming behind them. Warriors, courtiers, council members. Even servants came, drawn by something they couldn't name but felt in their bones. History was happening. The world was changing. And they wanted to witness it. The final trial site wasn't far. Just beyond the fortress walls, in the ancient courtyard that had served as an execution ground for 300 years. Where the firstborn had been brought to die. Where Liora's ancestors had bled into the stone and screamed their defiance at a world determined to erase them. A circle of silver fire burned in the courtyard's center, smokeless and cold, marking the trial boundary. And floating in that circle's heart was a mirror, massive, obsidian, reflecting nothing despite the moonlight. Waiting. The spirit wolves materialized from shadows, their massive forms surrounding the circle. The silver wolf who'd spoken before stepped forward, its ancient eyes finding Liora's. The final trial, it said, its voice resonating in her mind, and probably everyone else's too. The trial of sovereignty. You will enter the mirror and face the truth of what power means. What ruling means. What you will become if you claim your full birthright. And you will choose, take the crown, destroy it, or forge something entirely new. This is the moment the prophecy has been building toward. This is where you decide what kind of future you will create. What happens if I fail? Liora asked. You die. And the firstborn bloodline ends with you. And the world continues as it has wolves ruling wolves, power structures unchanged, the old ways eternal. The spirit wolf's gaze was impossibly old. Or you succeed. And everything changes. For better or worse, only time will tell. Liora looked back at Fenric. At Valen and the council. At the crowd of people who'd gathered to watch her either rise or fall. At Mira, standing near the back with hope written across her tear-stained face. So many people. So many lives that would be affected by what happened in the next hour. I'm ready, she said, and was surprised to find it was true. She stepped into the silver fire. It didn't burn. Instead, it felt like passing through a membrane, like being born into a new world. The moment she crossed the threshold, everything changed. The courtyard vanished. The crowd disappeared. Even the spirit wolves faded into nothing. She stood alone in a throne room that didn't exist. It was massive, larger than any physical space should be. Pillars of twisted bone and silver reached toward a ceiling lost in shadow. The floor was black glass that reflected stars she'd never seen. And at the room's far end, elevated on a dais of compressed skulls, sat a throne. Not just any throne. The throne. The seat of the firstborn High Queen. The symbol of absolute power that hadn't been occupied in over 300 years. And sitting in that throne, waiting for her, was herself. But not herself as she was now. This version was older, harder, wrapped in silver flames that had gone dark at the edges. Her eyes held no warmth, no mercy, no recognition of anything but power and the exercise of it. She wore a crown of blackened bone and her hands rested on the throne's arms with the casual certainty of someone who'd never been challenged and never expected to be. This was Liora if she chose to rule absolutely. If she took the crown and let the power consume everything else she was. Hello, little one, the throne version said, and her voice was Liora's, but wrong. Too cold. Too certain. Come to claim what's yours? I don't know what's mine, Liora admitted. Everything. The word was absolute. Every pack. Every territory. Every wolf who walks this earth. That's what our birthright means. That's what the firstborn were, apex predators who ruled because nothing could challenge them. And now you stand at the threshold of claiming that power again. She leaned forward, eyes glowing with silver fire. All you have to do is sit in this throne. Accept the crown. Let the full weight of our ancestors' power flood into you. And you'll be unstoppable. And everyone I care about will bow. Or die. Said so casually. Like it was the only logical outcome. That's what power means, little one. The strong rule. The weak serve. It's the natural order. It's what we were before the lesser wolves rose up and slaughtered us out of jealous fear. Liora stared at this version of herself and felt sick. That's not power. That's tyranny. They're the same thing. The throne version smiled. Power is the ability to enforce your will regardless of opposition. Everything else is just semantics. And you can have it. All of it. Just step forward. Take the crown. Stop pretending you want to build something new when what you really want is revenge for what they did to our mother. For what they did to you. The words struck home because they held truth. Liora did want revenge. wanted to make Valen and the council and everyone who'd benefited from her powerlessness understand what they'd taken from her. Wanted to watch them bow and scrape and beg for mercy they'd never shown her mother. The desire was there, dark and hungry and so very tempting. She took a step toward the throne. Yes, the other Liora breathed. Just a few more steps. Just accept what you are, a predator, a ruler, a force of nature that doesn't need to compromise or negotiate or make herself small for anyone's comfort. Take what's yours. Another step. The crown gleamed in the strange light, beautiful and terrible. She could feel the power radiating from it, calling to something deep in her blood. The throne wanted her. Her ancestors wanted this. 300 years of genocide and suppression and forced silence, all of it could be answered if she just reached out and took what they'd tried to steal. That's it, the throne version encouraged. Just a little further. Just. No. Liora stopped. Planted her feet. Let the hunger wash over her, and then past her. No. This isn't what I want. You're lying. I'm not. She met her dark reflection's eyes. Part of me does want this. Wants the power and the revenge and the satisfaction of making them pay. But that's not all I am. That's not even most of what I am. And if I take that throne, if I let that part win, I lose everything else. I lose the capacity for kindness, for mercy, for building instead of destroying. I become exactly what they feared, a monster with a crown. Better a monster who rules than prey who serves. False choice, Liora said, and felt certainty settling into her bones. I'm not prey anymore. But I don't have to be a monster either. I can be something else. Something new. The throne room shuddered. You're rejecting your birthright, the throne version hissed, power crackling around her. You're spitting on our ancestors' graves. You're choosing weakness over strength, compromise over dominance. I'm choosing myself, Liora interrupted. My whole self. Not just the parts that are convenient or powerful or fit some predetermined narrative. All of me. The strength and the compassion. The power and the vulnerability. The firstborn blood and the lessons I learned being powerless. All of it together, creating something that's never existed before. She turned her back on the throne. The moment she did, the room exploded into chaos. The throne version screamed, a sound of rage and betrayal that made the bone pillars crack. Silver fire erupted, not from Liora but from her dark reflection, attacking with vicious intent. But Liora didn't fight back. She stood there, arms at her sides, and let the fire wash over her. Let it test her resolve. Let it try to burn away her choice and force her back toward the throne. And she held firm through sheer stubborn certainty that this refusal to be only one thing, was the right path even if it was the harder one. The fire couldn't touch her. Because it was her fire. Her power. And power couldn't destroy what it came from. The throne version realized it at the same moment Liora did. Her eyes widened with something between fury and understanding. You're choosing transcendence, she breathed. The prophecy was real. You're going beyond rule or ruin. You're becoming something we never imagined. I'm becoming me, Liora said simply. Fully. Finally. Without apology. The throne room began to dissolve. The dark reflection, the crown, the seat of power, all of it fading like smoke and wind. And in its place, something new began to form. Not a throne room. Not a place of domination. A sanctuary. Open to sky and forest, with no walls to separate inside from outside. A circle of stones where wolves could gather as equals rather than subjects. A place of power that came from connection rather than hierarchy. It wasn't fully formed, it was more concept than reality, more potential than actuality. But it was hers. Not inherited. Not prophesied. Just created. The spirit wolf's voice echoed through the dissolving space. You have passed the trial of sovereignty. Not by claiming the crown. Not by destroying it. But by envisioning something entirely new. That is transcendence. That is what the prophecy meant when it spoke of a third path. And now, The world snapped back into focus. Liora stood in the courtyard again, the silver fire still burning around her. But she wasn't alone. She was wreathed in power that made the air itself shimmer, not dark or threatening, but bright and alive and utterly transformative. Her eyes glowed silver. Her skin radiated light. And above her head, instead of a crown of bone, floated a circlet of living flame that shifted and changed with every heartbeat. Not a crown. A manifestation of power choosing to be witnessed rather than worshipped. The crowd that had gathered gasped, dropped to their knees. Even Valen looked shaken, his cold certainty cracked by the sheer magnitude of what stood before him. Fenric alone remained standing. His eyes were wide with awe and pride and love so fierce it burned through their bond like wildfire. She did it, someone whispered. She passed all 3 trials. What is she? She is firstborn, the silver spirit wolf announced, its voice carrying across the courtyard. And she is more. She is the bridge between what was and what will be. The proof that power need not corrupt. That strength can coexist with compassion. That the old ways and new can forge something unprecedented. She is Liora Moonwhisper, daughter of Alara, heir to the flame, and she has chosen transcendence. The spirit wolves bowed. All of them. Ancient creatures acknowledging something that had never existed before, a firstborn who chose partnership over domination. Who held absolute power and decided not to wield it absolutely. Liora stepped out of the silver fire circle and immediately stumbled. The power was still too much, too vast, her mortal form struggling to contain immortal force. But before she could fall, Fenric was there, catching her, anchoring her the way he'd done since the beginning. Easy, he murmured against her hair. I've got you. Just breathe. Let me help ground it. She did, pulling on his strength through the bond, using his steady control to bank the power until it was manageable. The glow faded slightly. The circlet of flame dimmed to a soft pulse. And Liora found herself able to breathe again. I did it, she whispered, almost disbelieving. You did it, Fenric confirmed, and his voice held wonder. All 3 trials. You're fully awakened now. Fully yourself. Everything you were meant to be. She looked up at him, at this man who'd believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself, and felt something shift in her chest. The bond between them flared brilliant white, visible to everyone watching, and she understood something she hadn't before. The trials weren't just about her power. They were about claiming her whole self, power and vulnerability, strength and tenderness, independence and connection. And now that she was whole, now that she'd transcended the false choices, the bond could be whole too. Equal. Balanced. 2 sovereign beings choosing each other not from need but from want. I love you, she said, and the words felt like the most powerful magic she'd cast all night. Fenric's eyes blazed. I love you too. Always have. Always will. My mate. My equal. Your queen. They both turned to find Valen standing nearby, his expression carefully neutral. If the trials are passed and the firstborn bloodline is restored, then by ancient laws that predate even the council, she is claimed to sovereignty. The question is, will she exercise that claim? Every eye in the courtyard turned to Liora. This was it. The moment where she could take everything. Could declare herself queen by right of power and birthright. Could demand their submission and remake the world in her image. Or she could do something else entirely. No, Liora said clearly. I don't claim sovereignty over any of you. Shocked silence. But, she continued, straightening despite her exhaustion, I do claim the right to exist. The right to my power freely expressed. The right to my bond with Fenric without interference. And the right to have a voice in how this kingdom moves forward. She met Valen's eyes. I don't want to rule you. But I also won't be ruled by you. So let's figure out what partnership actually looks like. Together. As equals. Valen studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he inclined his head, not a bow, but an acknowledgement of respect between those who stood on equal ground. A new age, he said quietly. Whether it brings prosperity or ruin remains to be seen. But his lips quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't hostility either. It will certainly be interesting. The gathered crowd began to murmur, processing this impossible outcome. A firstborn who chose not to conquer. An alpha king who stood beside her rather than being supplanted. A future that nobody could quite predict, but everyone sensed would be fundamentally different. Liora swayed, exhaustion finally catching up with her. 3 trials in 3 nights. Her power fully awakened. The entire structure of her reality rebuilt from the ground up. It was too much. Fenric swept her into his arms before she could fall, cradling her against his chest. "That's enough for tonight," he said, his voice carrying royal authority despite his gentle hold on her. "The trials are complete. The convergence is over. Whatever comes next, we face it tomorrow. Tonight, we rest." No one argued. The crowd began to disperse, their voices rising in excited conversation. The spirit wolves faded back into shadow, their purpose fulfilled. And Fenric carried Liora through the fortress to her chambers, their chambers now, she supposed, while she drifted in and out of consciousness. She was aware of being laid down on soft blankets, of Fenric's warmth beside her, of the bond between them humming with contentment and relief, of her power finally settling into her bones like it had always belonged there. "Rest now," Fenric whispered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You did it. You passed all 3 trials. You became who you were meant to be. Now rest, and tomorrow we start building that new world you envisioned." Liora's last conscious thought before sleep claimed her was that she still had Myra's carved wolf clutched in her hand. A promise to return it. A reminder that power meant nothing if it wasn't used to protect people like that nervous, kind girl who'd seen her as human when everyone else saw either threat or savior. She'd keep that promise. She'd keep all of them. Because that's what transcendence meant, being powerful enough to choose kindness. Being strong enough to be gentle. Being fierce enough to build instead of destroy. And as she drifted off, surrounded by love and safety and the beginning of something unprecedented, Liora finally understood what her mother had been trying to give her. Not just survival, but the chance to live fully, powerfully, freely, herself. Morning came gentle and golden, spilling through windows that Liora had never imagined she'd wake up behind. She stirred slowly, awareness returning in layers. The softness of the bed beneath her. The warmth of Fenric's body beside her, his arm draped protectively across her waist. The steady hum of power in her chest, no longer foreign, no longer fighting against chains, just present. Part of her. Finally. She opened her eyes to find him already awake, watching her with an expression that made her heart skip. "Good morning, my queen," he said softly, and there was teasing in his voice, but also reverence. "I'm not a queen," she protested, but the argument was half-hearted. "You are to me." His hand came up to trace the line of her jaw, his touch reverent. "You're everything to me." They stayed like that for a long moment, wrapped around each other, savoring the peace that felt both earned and fragile. Outside, the world was waking up to its new reality. Inside, they were just 2 people who'd survived the impossible and were trying to figure out what came next. "What do we do now?" Liora asked quietly. Fenric considered. "Now we build. Exactly what you promised, something that's never been tried before. A kingdom that has room for both old ways and new. Where firstborn and common wolves can exist without one destroying the other. Where power serves instead of dominates." "That sounds impossible." "So did you once." His smile was crooked. "We'll figure it out. Together. One impossible thing at a time." A knock interrupted them. Not urgent, but persistent. Fenric sighed and called for whoever it was to enter. It was Mira. The girl stood in the doorway, clutching her healer's apron and looking terrified and hopeful in equal measure. When she saw Liora sitting up, alive and whole and radiant with lingering power. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You came back," she whispered. "You kept your promise." Liora held out the carved wolf she'd kept clutched in her hand through the entire final trial. "I told you I would. Thank you for the luck. I think it helped more than you know." Mira took the carving with shaking hands, then did something unexpected. She dropped to one knee, head bowed. "I want to serve you," she said. "Not because I have to. Not because you have power or a prophecy or any of that. But because you're the only person who ever made me feel like I mattered. And I want to be part of whatever you're building. Please." Liora slid out of bed, went to the girl, and gently raised her back to her feet. "I don't want servants," she said firmly. "I want allies. Friends. People who choose to stand beside me because they believe in the same things I do. So if you want to be part of this, then be part of it. But as an equal, not as someone kneeling." Myra's eyes widened, fresh tears spilling over. "An equal. Me. A clumsy healer's apprentice. A person," Liora corrected. "With value that has nothing to do with status or power or any of the hierarchies we're going to dismantle. Just you. And that's enough. That's always been enough." The girl broke down completely, sobbing with relief and joy and the overwhelming weight of being seen. And Liora held her, this stranger who'd shown her kindness when no one else had, and felt the first real stirrings of what she was meant to build. Not a kingdom of subjects. A community of equals. Where no one had to earn their worth through power or service or usefulness. Where existing was enough. It would take time. Would face opposition. Would require constant negotiation and compromise and fighting against old patterns that had been established for centuries. But it was possible. Because she'd proven the impossible was just another kind of challenge. Later, after Mira had left and they dressed and prepared to face the court, Fenric pulled Liora aside. "Are you ready for this? For everything that's coming? The politics, the resistance, the constant battles to make people understand what we're trying to do." Liora thought about everything she'd been through. The years of powerlessness. The binding that had stolen her birthright. The trials that had nearly killed her. The choice to transcend instead of taking the easy path of either submission or domination. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "But I'm also excited. For the first time in my life, I get to choose. Really choose. Not just survive or endure, but actively create. And I'm choosing this. Choosing us. Choosing the possibility that something better can exist. Even if it's hard. Especially because it's hard." Her smile was fierce. The easy path would be taking that throne and forcing everyone to bend. But that's not transcendence. That's just trading one form of tyranny for another. Real change is harder. Slower. Requires actually listening and compromising and accepting that I won't get everything I want. "But you'll get something better," Fenric said. "Something that lasts. Something built on choice instead of coercion." Exactly. They walked together toward the throne room where the council was already gathering. Where decisions would be made about what this new future would actually look like. Where Liora would have to prove, every single day, that power could exist without corruption. That strength could coexist with compassion. That the prophecy's third path, transcendence, was real and achievable. It wouldn't be easy. But nothing worth having ever was. And as she walked through those doors, Fenric's hand in hers, silver fire dancing beneath her skin, and the future stretching before her like an unwritten story, Liora felt something she'd never experienced before. Hope. Not the desperate, fragile hope of someone praying for rescue. But the fierce, burning hope of someone who'd taken her fate into her own hands and forged something new from the ashes of what had been. She was firstborn. She was mate to the Alpha King. She was herself, fully, finally, without apology or compromise. And she was going to change everything. The throne room doors opened. Every eye turned to her. And in that moment, suspended between what was and what could be, Liora made a choice. She smiled. Not the submissive smile of a servant trying to please. Not the vicious smile of a conqueror surveying her domain, but the genuine, fierce, hopeful smile of someone who believed, truly believed, that a better world was possible. And she was going to build it, one impossible choice at a time. Would you have chosen her path? Would you have rejected the throne when absolute power was within reach? Would you have offered partnership to those who'd tried to destroy you? Would you have chosen transcendence over the easy satisfaction of rule or ruin? Or would you have done what most would, taken the crown, claimed your revenge, and let the world burn for what it did to you? Liora chose differently. Chose harder. Chose hope even when vengeance would have been so much sweeter. She chose to be more than her pain. More than her power. More than any prophecy could contain. She chose to be herself. And in doing so, she became something unprecedented. Something dangerous not because of violence, but because of possibility. Because when one person proves that power doesn't have to corrupt, that strength can coexist with kindness, that transcendence is achievable, it threatens every structure built on the assumption that people must choose between being strong or being good. She proved you could be both. The question is, can you? When you face your own impossible choices between power and compassion, between revenge and forgiveness, between taking what you want and building what you need, which path will you choose? Will you rule? Will you ruin? Or will you transcend? Liora chose transcendence. And her story, this story of a girl who was told she was nothing and became everything without losing her humanity, is just the beginning. If this story lit something inside you, if Liora's choice to be fierce and kind, powerful and gentle, strong and vulnerable all at once made you feel seen, then you belong here at Shayla's Romance Library. Because here, we tell stories that don't ask you to choose between strength and softness. Stories where power serves love instead of destroying it. Stories where the impossible becomes achievable through sheer stubborn refusal to accept that this is all there is. Hit that subscribe button. Join this community of dreamers and believers and people who think transcendence is possible. Because Liora's story isn't finished. This was just her awakening. Her claiming of power. Her first steps into a future no one has mapped. But what comes next? How does she build this unprecedented kingdom? How does she navigate a world that fears her power while trying to prove it doesn't need to? How do she and Fenric forge a partnership that honors both their strengths without either diminishing the other? That story is coming, and you won't want to miss it. So subscribe to Shayla's Romance Library. Ring that notification bell. Because here, we believe in love stories where both people are powerful. Where happy endings are earned through impossible choices and fierce determination. Where transcendence isn't just a prophecy, it's a daily practice of choosing to be more than circumstances tried to make you. Liora chose herself. Now you choose whether to follow her journey. And trust me, you want to see where she goes next. Because a woman who passed 3 trials, rejected a crown, and chose to build something unprecedented, she's just getting started.